All right, everyone. We are starting the March 26, 2025 Finance Committee meeting in person for the first time in quite a while. Good to see everybody. We do have quorum, so we will be kicking off. Our agenda tonight is relatively straightforward, which is a word I use far too much in these meetings. Connor is going to do a couple of different presentations and discussions around what's coming up, current state of the operating budget, change memo. We have the chair and vice chair of the PACE committee here to do a presentation on final recommendations and the community compact, which we just went over, and they did a presentation on Monday for the select board. We have a transfer request that Wendy will go into, and then really the majority of the rest of the meeting is going to be the warrant articles. Currently, just so everyone's on the same page, the only ones we can vote on, to my understanding, are 6, 7, 8, 10, 11, and 13. Wendy, is there anything for 9 yet, prior year bills?
No, there are no prior year bills right now.
So we only have 6 of the 13 to vote on tonight. The others are placeholders and or financial ones that we don't have final numbers for, which is half the reason why we're meeting tonight. So we can go through those relatively straightforward and quickly, I think. So I don't see us being here until anything later than 1 a.m.
Sounds good.
Okay, so we're all on the same page. All right, with that, I'm going to turn it over to our established administrator let's discuss the April 29th hearing first, and then you can go into your presentation.
Thank you, Patrick. It's nice to see everyone here in person. April 29th will be the charter budget hearings. As the committee is aware, under Easton's charter, no closer to town meeting than 2 weeks out, the Finance Committee and the Select Board need to have a joint public hearing on the budget proposal for the coming year. In the past, we have typically done that the last week of April. Usually the budget's balanced by then. And we would have it spread out over 2 nights because there's so many departments. This year, given the level of interest, I expect in what will be budgets, plural, at that time, there will be the balanced budget, the progress on which I'll brief you on tonight, which will be primarily balanced through pretty draconian cuts to town and school operations and reserves, and then an override contingent budget. We felt it would be wise and helpful to the public to have all of it in one night. We did not feel it would be wise to have it be a 7-hour hearing. So much like we subtotal many of the small town departments into general government, health and community services, we will present them that way at the hearing so that it will really be the largest budgets that we can focus on the difference between the non-override and override, the impacts on staff cuts. And so you'll have general government, health and community services, police, fire, public works, schools. So that will be Tuesday, the 29th. We will hold it in the auditorium at Oliver Ames. Again, I'm expecting a pretty sizable turnout for that budget hearing. So,
What time does it start?
I do not have that in front of me. I think it's 6:30, but don't quote me, says the man into the microphone. I think it's 6:30, but we will get that back to you. I know, not to put the chair on the spot, I know Patrick has it. I just don't have my computer in here. Yeah. I will confirm while Tom and Nancy are presenting. I will get my computer and confirm.
Check it out. It's already on my calendar.
Yeah, it's because I'm amazing at what I do.
Simple man.
Awesome. All right. So anyone have any questions about logistics for that? That is, again, going to be, I guess my clarifying question before I let anybody else go is that, so in past years, for those of you who remember this, we went through essentially line item, right? Department by department line item scenarios. We're shortening that, so we're not.
You will still have the line item for every single department.
Right.
I just think, and of course all of my department heads will be there. There's a very specific question about any one expense line you were free to ask. I just think that spending a couple of hours having 1 and 2 person departments get up to say we have no increases to expenses, we've level funded this and this is a contractual increase, is not perhaps the most productive use of everyone's time when there will understandably be a lot of focus and concern on the school budget, public safety, public works, and the impact of a potential override. So we will still publish a line item budget as we always do for every single department. None of that has changed. It's just that we're not going to necessarily have every single small department get up to present this is what our department does, and it'll be subtotaled into the larger, I'm presenting for general government and health and community services, and then David Field will present for all of public works, that type of thing.
Awesome. Just wanted to make sure I understood that correctly. Does anyone else have any questions about that date that I theoretically should have the time as well, but I do not?
I will get the time for everyone before this meeting is over.
I think it's 6:30, but I'm off and wrong. Seeing none, thank you. Let's dive into part 2 here. Does anyone need a hard copy of an agenda or the compact or the budget? We have a few up here if anyone does not have it available digitally. It looks like everybody does. Christina, do you have it? Do you want it?
I have my computer.
Alrighty. So then, Connor, it's back to you for the town administrator update.
Sure, thank you, Patrick. Good evening, and again, it's nice to see everyone here. I know that you've been provided with some of these materials already. We always send any budget issue to every chair of every committee, and so I know folks are following along. But as we enter the final stretch of balancing the non-override budget, I felt it was worth coming in and giving you all the time to question me and Wendy and understand where we're at, because next year is going to be a very tough year. So this presentation is based on a memo that I issued to the select board Monday night and provided to the board. In the event anyone's watching at home, all of these materials are available online at easton.ma.us/FY26 budget. So since January, when we issued the preliminary budget, we've made really important progress reducing that deficit. In January, we started and it was north of 6 million. By February, we had reduced that to 5.4 million with a combination of budget cuts and revenue adjustments. And tonight, or Monday night, and I'll present it again tonight, we're documenting how we've reduced that further to 2.29 million. This is not by the process of finding money that some folks sometimes ask when they follow a budget process from afar and say, well, this is smoke and mirrors. The town always says it has a shortfall, and then poof, you're at town meeting and everything's fine. We are reducing expenses through significant cuts to personnel and programs, and we are adjusting revenue as year-to-date actual collections for things like excise tax and building permits come in, as state budgets are filed, and in the case of this memo, as we make a decision on where we think we need to outlay reserve funds. So there's no finding money. This is reducing the deficit through large expense cuts and those revenue changes. The non-override budget next year would enact the largest cuts to town and school services in Easton since at least the 2008 recession. The town departmental requests have been cut. Collectively, the initial level service request was a 5.3% increase over the current year. That has been reduced to 1.6%, taking $784,000 out of our budgets and cutting staff levels to the lowest they've been for our town departments in years, despite being busier than ever across all of those departments, whether that's permit volume and complexity, capital asset, project management, ambulance runs, 911 calls. 6 positions are cut entirely. An additional 0.95 full-time equivalents are having hours reduced or having positions moved into fee-based out of the operating budget. Those cuts don't count ones that we made last year, like the staff cut to the police department. They do not count vacancies from folks who have resigned that we have frozen because we do not feel comfortable hiring in this environment. And they don't count long-term absences from injuries on duty. Collectively, we will be heading into the summer with 11 fewer personnel than we had last summer. And our total headcount is about 165, so that's about 6.5% fewer staff than where we were last year. This is a high-level overview of each specific adjustment. In total, we're moving from a shortfall of 5.4 million to 2.29. The vast majority of change, and what the focus of my remarks will be, is from the application of stabilization fund dollars and cuts to town operating budgets. Budget change 2 is shown here on screen. It's an additional $526,000 of cuts to town departments, including general government, police, and fire. As I mentioned before, we've now cut $784,000 from the town requests, dropping the increase next year to 1.6% over the current year. The police department preliminary request of $5.6 million will be cut by about $200,000. That cut will drop a second police officer position in 2 years, bringing the police department to its lowest staff level in 10 years and about 22% below the average staffing of our neighboring police agencies. To reduce overtime spending, the detective division will be reduced from 4 to 3 detectives. For perspective, numerous surrounding agencies, including in smaller communities, staff 5 full-time equivalents for this function. This means that there will be lower clear rates, longer response times, and that the detective division will necessarily need to focus their efforts only on the most serious criminal matters. Overnight staffing, the midnight to 8 a.m. shift, will be cut from 5 minimum to 4, with 1 in the station and only 3 patrol on the road. This will mean that only 1 priority 911 can be answered immediately. That's a call where you, for the safety of not just the folks receiving the call, but for our police, they need 2 people to respond. If you have 2 of them happening concurrently, that second one will take longer to respond, as that third of 3 patrol officers on the road wait for the person to arrive either from the station or from mutual aid. In recent years, the police department has assigned a community resource officer to work 3 days per week to co-respond and provide non-911 time funds will be cut, which will significantly cut back on any non-safety related public engagements that the police do now, which are a very important part of building relationships in our community.
Could I ask 2 questions about that
Yes.
page while we're on it? So, number 1, the overnight staff, I think you said this, but the police station, it's not a dark station. There's still going to be 1 person in the police station.
Person in the station.
I had a couple questions about that. I want to make sure we covered that overtly.
But the trade-off for that is that there will only be 3 on the road.
Right. But second point is, can you, this might not be something you can talk to because it's staffing, but can you speak a little bit more about what 0 to 1 day per week for the mental health clinician?
Sure. So you may look at this and say, why, if you're cutting 2 positions, do we see numerous things going down? Part of, for police and fire in particular, cutting budgets is not just reducing positions. You have to also change staffing models, because if you reduce the total number of staff but you keep that staffing to 5, that just means that you're going to fill that 5th spot with even more expensively on overtime.
Yeah.
So you need to not just have fewer staff just to reduce that spending. You need to also then cut overtime, in the way that you can do that is through changing staff levels. So when you say what does 0 to 1 day per week look like, if it's a day where that officer is available and can be taken out of shift staffing without triggering a forced overtime call to backfill them, then they will work with the clinician. If going with the clinician for a non-emergency matter would trigger a forced overtime, then they would not.
Got it.
Is the clinician fee-based or?
The clinician is in the Health and Community Services budget.
How do you know how long the response time will increase if they're waiting for police from other towns?
No, I can't give a good answer on that. Fire, we have a better idea because ambulance runs are a bit more, I don't want to say routine, I don't want to say the wrong thing here. We have better minute per minute on fire because they respond from static locations. Police on patrol don't, right?
Yeah.
So response time can be influenced by a variety of factors, including where is the patrol vehicle in that sector relative to where the call comes from. So this is not for me to to suggest automatically there will just not be anyone available, right? That's something that whenever there's tight budgets, there are folks who are sensitive and say that things like this are scare tactics. I want to be very thoughtful to not prognosticate and say it will look exactly like this and this, but what we can confidently say is that on nights like that, when there are only 4, if there's a concurrent call, it will be slower than if we were staffing appropriately. We don't know how much, depends on the type of call, where that officer is, but it will be a worse level of response than we have today.
Connor, just another question, just on reduced community resource officers. Can you elaborate more on what type of events? For instance, community resource officers are at the high school. The football games, basketball games are usually something.
Sure. Thank you. So we have a school resource officer program, right? And that's one that I think is a bit more traditional that folks are familiar with. It includes a lot of the things that you talk about. They also help with civil rights related matters. They work with school staff and teachers and families. And it just maintains a really critical line of communication between schools and public safety and families. The community resource officer is a different position, one that was prioritized under Chief Boone, where it's a similar concept where you are having a police presence for non-911. And in this case, it is an officer that is trained. They work with crisis intervention teams. They work with Easton's own team, the CARE team, which is Community At-Risk Empowerment, which is our mental health clinician, the paramedicine captain from the fire department. For now, that's cut on the next page. And our public health staff, so that they can work with families who, where the challenge is not necessarily a criminal one, right? But we don't have sufficient health care in our society, and that includes mental health care. And so we have worked really hard within the limited capacity we've had to do better there and expand access, whether that's through Interface, which is a program people who go to school here or live here can use to try to navigate, just navigating the bureaucracy of your own insurance to get placed with therapeutic services is really hard. Or having the community resource officer and the clinician, so that if there's an overdose, when, it was not that long ago, 15, 20 years ago, before police were even carrying Narcan, right? And so now, instead of an officer is carrying Narcan, which is normal, we also have the CRO and the clinician follow up with the family, sometimes at the hospital, to check on this person, to see how they're doing, to see what resources we might be able to provide to help them reintegrate into their homes and their community and their workplace and be healthy and thrive and not be in a position like that again. And it's been incredibly impactful. It's made a really huge difference, and we're really sad to see that this will be getting scaled back, because it's a very real need. We built this up slowly over time, and within days of the clinician working here, her 8-hour days are full every single day. And this is a real need. And so the clinician position is still in the budget, but we can't cut this level out of the police department and not start pulling back on assignments like that and reprioritizing to those kind of legal minimums of patrol. I hope that was helpful. Thank you.
Quick question. I don't know, maybe it's not quick, and might be more appropriately put to Chief Boone, but that CRO, just looking at it, that they were only available 3 days a week.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any data that shows an impact to, I don't even know the word I want to use, operating load on the police when they're present versus when they're not?
Am I hearing the question correctly, that is there a way to kind of quantitatively tie the preventative visits on the front end to a decrease in, it's hard to do that. I will speak with the chief and with the clinician and see if there's, I would be hesitant to say there's a causal data pattern that we would have this early on, but I will follow up with them.
Well, I would think there would be, because just coming from a number of other bigger communities, you reduce that service, you get more 911 calls, you get more activity from the police that shouldn't be criminal.
Correct.
Right.
You get more, non-criminal.
Well, and being, I mean, I'm an enormous fan of it, as you articulated you are, and I was just curious if
Oh, it's a good question. I'll
There
follow
was
up with them.
data.
I mean, it would be obviously heavily anonymized and.
Of course.
Sure. No, I'll see if there's anything I can pull for you.
If you don't mind, Tom Broussard from 28 Armour Lane. This might be a little more difficult than I'm accustomed to, but I do feel it's important that I stand up and advocate for the CRO and for the clinician. My family has a member who suffers from mental health. These people, I know them by name and I won't name them, but they have been instrumental partners. They have visited us unrequested just to ask how we're doing, to assist after events have happened, traumatic events that have impacted our family. And I can tell you that they were instrumental in saving us tens of thousands of dollars from insurance costs by helping us coordinate between the police, between the clinicians that we were involved with from a medical perspective, and the insurance company directly. I don't talk about this often. It's a big impact, but I can assure you that that is one of the most impactful community programs that's ever helped my family, because we didn't know how to access resources. And I would say that we're relatively intelligent people, affluent people, and then we have resources. And I can just imagine if people aren't as well off as we are, how their family members may suffer. Oftentimes the only solution between a clinical or mental health challenge and prison and jail is prison and jail, because it gets to that point. And having an intervention step or people that can assist you in helping get the mental health treatment that your family members need is beyond priceless. So I just wanted to give you that as a private citizen.
Thank you. The fire and EMS preliminary request of $6 million will be cut by $284,000. That will cut 2 full-time equivalent positions from the fire department on top of 3 positions that are currently vacant due to long-term injuries on duty and a recent resignation. Minimum staffing per shift will be cut from 8 to 7, and on days when only 7 are on shift, the Lothrop Street Fire Station will close, and we will only be able to run 1 ambulance, which is not appropriate for a community of this size with this many residents. The fire department responds to 8 to 10 medical 911s every single day, 365 days per year. And dropping to 1 ambulance will have a significant negative impact on response time for any concurrent call. And those are common, right? Because the 8 to 10 are not spread out exactly perfectly over 24 hours. They peak during rush hour and times when there's a lot of traffic. And not only has an impact on response capabilities, it will have a negative impact on the other side of the budget ledger, because that will drop ambulance transport revenue as well. If you are of a second 911 caller and are waiting on a mutual aid ambulance, this can be the difference of a response from an ambulance in town of 6 minutes or less to 10, 15 or more. Community paramedicine, which is the public health kind of sister program to the community resource officer. This is something that we really formalized through the pandemic, where we have a public health department and we have an emergency health response team, and they work together, but we really built out that relationship, and that's a partnership between the fire department, paramedic, and the health and community services department to provide proactive health services for folks who, whether it's mental health, physical health, other ailments, we try to connect them with resources so that they can get healthy and reduce the necessity of calling 911. They also do things like community safety programs for car seat installations and for training wheels, and that will also be reduced so that that position can be reassigned to the line to reduce overtime spending, similar to the CRO. Training funds will be reduced, and community overtime and education will be cut. So that's things like the fire open house, touch a truck. Yes?
Didn't mean to interrupt you there.
No,
I
you-
totally cut your train of thought up. The firefighter who resigned,
was this position, did he or she go to a different department, more money, is it?
Yeah, so I obviously can't speak on people's individual behalf, but yes, there have, when public agencies are in the position we are in, people look for opportunities elsewhere.
Thank you.
And that's a real risk that we are facing right now.
That's what I was getting at.
And you will hear probably the very same thing from Dr. Cabral. There's not a lot of safe harbors out there right now. This is not a problem unique to Easton, but it is a real risk to our retention, which we rely on. We invest particularly in public safety quite heavily on the front end to train people up and have them be ready for these really critical jobs. And we want them to have long, successful careers here. But that is, in unions where layoffs are seniority based, there's a big impact.
Certainly. Thank you.
Thank you.
The charts that you have on this and the previous one,
Yes.
just is the rank based on the budget 902, or are they based on the?
But it's based on the most recent statewide data available, which is usually lags 18 to 24 months. But our trajectory over time has been further downward. So,
No, I realize. I was just curious if these were actually lower once cuts occur.
our positioning will be lower. The per capita spend will probably be marginally higher than 18 to 24 months ago. But I mean, the police are already second from the bottom. Town government is one of near the bottom of all towns in all of Massachusetts. So there's not much farther. But yes, with the trajectory there, and it's a good question for anyone following home saying what's the relevance here. We track in the operational audit that was funded in the wake of a failed override a decade ago, looked at these communities that are economically comparable to Easton to answer the question that often comes up when there's an override being discussed, which is these folks must just not be minding the store well, right? And that report, which still lives on our website, came back and said you're actually understaffed in almost every department and you spend far fewer dollars per resident than most of your peers. And so we continue to use that benchmarking and we update it every few years. And the spread, the disparity on per resident spending in Easton compared to our neighbors and peers has consistently grown over time. So that's what these figures represent. And it's, I know that the finance committee as well, where you look at all budgets, but there are folks that for every constituency, these cuts hurt. And depending on the lens and the experience you bring to the table, you may say, well, don't cut this department, cut over there. Every department is being cut, and none of them are being cut from a position where they're comparatively well-funded. They're already all running very lean, and they're being cut into the bone.
Can I just ask one last clarifying question on the previous slide, which is just I'm being overt again, blackout of Lothrop Station would be, the firefighters are there, it's just no walk-in association, or is it they're not there at all?
On days where they're, and let me qualify that. I believe, and I will confirm with the chief, unlike a dark station for police, going to 2 stations being online would just be a function because there's currently 3 fire stations until the building project is done.
Right.
If you have only 7 on a shift, you need 2 minimum to run a truck. And so to allocate them more efficiently near the busier calls, it's better to spread 7 out over 2 than to try to spread them out over 3.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
But I'll confirm that.
Okay.
And then there's a comparatively smaller cut this round, but on top of another 100,000 some odd to general government. In total, we're cutting general government, which is about a $3 million budget, by 154,000. We're adding 30,000 into the finance committee reserve because so that actually that makes it look we're increasing the town budgets, but it's just moving that from free cash into the reserve fund that you manage, because realistically, as we just keep cutting and cutting and cutting and cutting, we will have zero capacity to absorb a single unplanned thing next year, and we'll probably need to come see you, and so that's why there's a net there.
What's our total going to be then?
130.
Okay.
We are cutting an additional 45,000 from IT. Some of that is just actual good news. We renegotiated the price of our managed IT and licensing contracts, which is great. So thank you to Mike Deltano for that. But some of that is the elimination of certain security-related planning that we ought to be doing and want to do. But when we are cutting police and fire and public works and positions in town hall, we just can't do it. General government is the lowest per resident spend of any of our departments, and that's deliberate. We've had limited funds for a long time. We've had a structural revenue deficit for a long time. We've been a minimum aid school district for a long time. And so the operating funds that we have had available, we have prioritized education and public safety. And that doesn't mean that those departments have gotten everything they need. But that has been a priority compared to town hall. We have cut positions in town hall. They will take us backwards as well. We are not staffed appropriately. Wendy and I have worked together for a very long time. Wendy has been the accountant for longer than she and I have worked together, and many of our finance and administration departments are running with the same number of staff or fewer than we had in the 90s. And the level of complexity and the volume of responsibility has grown substantially since then, and that is not a good plan. But again, in this environment, we're working on loss mitigation right now as far as how bad staff cuts are. So none of this is for me to say, okay, so we should add positions here. We're not doing that. We're going the other way. I know the finance committee knows this, but for anyone watching, I think I can't not repeat that these cuts don't reflect what we think is the right thing for the departments or for the people who live here, but they reflect a financial reality, which is that we have to balance a budget every year. And when we get broadsided by 20% healthcare growth in an 18-month window, if you don't have revenue growing at the rate, which we do not, you have to cut out of your operations. And so I think the tone here is obviously quite somber. I don't think anyone would hear this and think anyone's excited about this, but I didn't want it to go unsaid. Again, there's some good news here. All 7 of the town unions' collective bargaining agreements were set to expire this June. That's obviously a relatively tough environment to try to negotiate a multi-year contract. And 6 of 7 of our unions have agreed to just take a 1-year extension that fits within a 2% wage budget that we were carrying. And these workers represent the large majority of our workforce in police, public works, water division, general government, health and community service. And I really appreciate them, and I appreciate that they're working with us to provide some measure of stability in our budget planning during a really volatile time. So
What about the 7th? Is that still in negotiation?
That is open. So we'll negotiate with that unit and keep working there. But as I had put in previous budget memos, for groups that were not on contract by late March, we were going to remove that wage, that 2% from those departmental budgets, because to carry that would force more job cuts at a time when we're not on contract. So we'll have to work in good faith with that group and try to get to resolution probably over the summer, and we will have to assess that budget in the fall. Schools are continuing their efforts to reduce their level service budget requests. Due to the relative size of the public schools within the total budget, the cuts will be substantial. The school committee budget hearing is, I believe, next Thursday, April 3rd, where their budget inclusive of reductions will be presented. Looking at fixed costs, our debt service remains manageable. Non-exempt debt for routine capital borrowing will increase by 6.7% next year, which is a decent percentage growth, but that's actually only 3.6% above where we were in fiscal 23. So our non-exempt debt service is very conservative. When you look at that as a spend ratio of our total budget, about 2.5% to 3% of our operating budget pays for non-exempt debt. Exempt debt will increase next year by 2.7 million, as will a commensurate amount of tax revenue exempt from Prop 2.5. Given the very hard operating budget we are facing next year, there's some who have wondered whether our debt exclusions like Blanche Ames or the police, fire, and public works project are contributing to the operating shortfall that we have. The answer is no, and the deficit next year can't be fixed by delaying or stalling an approved debt exclusion either. The most important factor explaining why is that the recent building projects are done through a debt exclusion, which raise the necessary revenue to pay 20 and 30-year bonds outside of your typical operating budget. The revenue raised and the corresponding bond payments are not typical income and expense that even if you wanted to, you could reallocate to a different need. The exempt revenue has to only be spent paying for bonds of the specific project that was approved, and only in the actual amounts you eventually go on to borrow. And you obviously need to get approval at the forecasting stage, at the budget stage, and that's why when you complete a debt exclusion like Blanche James under budget, the community doesn't get to keep the excess revenue. So if voters approve a $435 tax increase like they did for Blanche James, but it comes in under budget and it actually costs $285, which is what it is, that net just never gets raised. So that can't just get taken and reallocated to operating needs. As the Finance Committee knows, the only way to increase outside of 2.5 recurring revenue to operating departments is an operating override, which Easton has not approved in 19 years. When budgets are this painful, it's reasonable and responsible to ask, what can we freeze in this year's budget to save for next year? So things like hiring freezes can make sense, and that's why the town has had one in place for months outside of 1 or 2 positions that we have to fill. We have had freezes on many of our vacancies because that will actually save operating dollars that can then be allocated out against the budget next year. But because debt exclusions are outside of that standard operating budget, delaying them doesn't save $1 for your operating deficit. Delaying them would actually dramatically increase the cost that taxpayers pay. And we don't have to speculate on that point. Market data shown on screen behind me and Easton's own experience show that delaying capital projects ultimately costs taxpayers much, much, much more. The slide behind me is publicly available construction cost data from the Massachusetts School Building Authority. You can see the cost here per square foot on the left and time starting in 2009 moving through 2027 on the bottom. As Finance Committee recalls, voters approved the debt exclusion in fall of 2019, and only a few months after that, the pandemic hit. It wouldn't have been unreasonable, given a pandemic, to slow down or stop the project, but we didn't. We kept at it, and that choice paid off and was part of how we plowed ahead and delivered that building $13 million under budget. When you look at what communities paid to build a school only 2 years later, that is a difference of 47% per square foot. And these aren't me coming up, these are actual projects. Blanche James at $445 per square foot, and only 2 years later, the average per square foot construction cost schools were paying was in the mid 600s. I've layered our public safety project on here. There's no grant authority for anything but school buildings, which is a shame and something we've heavily advocated for years, but has not come through from the state. And you could see that the 4-year difference between Blanche James and the Police Fire Public Works makes it a meaningfully more expensive project on a per square foot basis. But you can also see, when you look towards the upper right portion of the screen, that the projects looking to break ground in 1 or 2 years from now are looking at costs that are even worse. They're looking at costs of $900 to $1,000 or more dollars per square foot. So that's what 1 to 2 years of delay would look like. And what that means, actual dollars, and this almost looks made up because it's so outrageous. But again, these are from real construction numbers from real projects. Blanche Ames proceeded, the actual project was done for $82 million. If it was delayed by 2 years due to COVID, then that would have been a $120 million project. If it were delayed for more years, had we not taken the MSBA grant when that came knocking, let's say we did it in the 2020s, it would be a $165 million project. If you were not advancing the Police Fire Public Works project, which is shown here at its full budget, this doesn't account for the fact that the contract was awarded $9 million under budget because we don't want to count chickens before they hatch. Looking at the actual projects in the MSBA pipeline for public construction, you would cost Easton $20 million. if this was delayed 2 years. Regrettably, we can't control the fact that there will be hard operating years during the course of any 1 year for capital projects that take 10 or more years from conception through numerous rounds of voter approval and completion. And while we're breaking ground on a project this year, that work flows all the way back to 2013. Easton's leadership and voters at that time recognized the deteriorating condition of our public facilities, many of our schools and most of our municipal buildings, and funded the creation of a comprehensive facilities replacement program. Since then, they have approved projects that, when all is said and done, will replace 84% of all municipal buildings and a third of all total public buildings, town and school, in Easton. The debt exclusions are substantial, but they are also on track to replace 8 buildings, most of which were 50 to 75 years old, at a lower tax impact than many communities are facing for the prospect of a single school today. $1,000, $1,500, and $2,000 per year tax impacts for single schools are becoming rather commonplace in communities as small as Berkeley and as large as Lexington. The operating budget deficit that we face next year is not caused by these projects. It cannot be fixed by halting these projects. There are, however, 2 very large factors that are driving that deficit. The first of them is what's shown here on screen. Health insurance, property insurance, pension assessments, and regional school assessments in Easton have skyrocketed in the past 2 years. For perspective, the 2-year, $2 million increase to health insurance is equal to how much healthcare insurance grew in Easton in the 10 years preceding that. It is greater than the budget increases to the police department in 10 years, and it is roughly the amount of money it takes to run all of health and community services for 2 years. Looking at the 4 items shown up on screen that have gone up $3.6 million in 2 years, compare that to our largest revenue categories. Our non-exempt tax revenue next year, that is our single largest source of revenue, is forecast to go up $2.6 million. The next biggest revenue category of state aid is forecast to go up $360,000, which is 1/10 of what these 4 items have grown in 2 years. Keep in mind as well, now that these town departments have been cut back so far, the total increase to every single town department, police, fire, public works, town hall, next year is $330,000. Since the last update I gave to the board, the state GIC, that's a group insurance commission, that is a group consortium for insurance that Easton is in for our employees, all the state employees are in there. They set their final rates for fiscal 26, and they were actually somehow worse than the 12% increase that was forecast. Depending on which plan, some are going up 10%, some are going up as much as 17% year over year. The town's taken numerous actions since then to mitigate these increases, including adopting future retiree premium contribution reductions, convening all of our town and school unions to assess whether there's an opportunity for us to make some adjustments to active healthcare, and expanding our opt-out programs to reduce the total number of insured that we carried. We have nearly 1,000 between active and retirees that we cover. And for years, to mitigate costs, we have run incentive and opt-out programs where folks who could provide proof of eligible insurance elsewhere, we would engage in a cost savings share with them and pay them a bonus to leave our insurance pool, because it is still a large net savings for the town. This year, we'll be expanding that to retirees who are under the age of Medicare eligibility, to see if we can grow that pool of folks who have perhaps insurance elsewhere.
Just for reference, what is the town's portion that we pay?
75-25. And so the select board adopted changes that folks retiring after this January, that drops to 70-30, and after the January after 60-40, which is a meaningful reduction in benefits. This will also have a real impact on retention. This is not something the board did lightly. It's not something I recommended lightly, but there is no part of our budget that we can. It's not as competitive as we would like to be. There are communities as low as 50-50.
Huh?
There are, yes, for retirees, not usually for active employees. But I think when folks think of public sector employment, the frame of reference is kind of like unlimited healthcare, and those days have been gone for a while, and we're continuously moving farther and farther away from that. And so this is a very unappealing change for our workforce, right? And I think there's sometimes, again, when you're talking about overrides, some cynicism towards public sector of this assumption that they have kind of these unlimited benefits and that they never get rolled back, and that is not true. So, is it lower than others? Not all of them. Will it be less competitive than some of the communities we compete with for talent? Yes. The second major driver of the deficit next year is our long history as a minimum aid community. As the Finance Committee knows, we are entitled as a minimum aid school district to as little as $30 per student of new education funding per year, which shakes out to about a $100,000 increase against a $50 million school system. Had our state aid levels back in 2008 simply just kept up with inflation, our state aid this year would be around 17 million instead of 12.9. In the past 2 years in Massachusetts, the number of schools sliding into minimum aid status has exploded. Easton used to be somewhat of an anomaly, and now everyone is down here with us. And 75% of public schools in Massachusetts are now minimum aid. And it is not an accident that that is happening at the same time that the rate of overrides being sought in Massachusetts has doubled effectively overnight. Because if your largest operating category has its largest revenue source go from growing 3 to 5% a year to less than 1%, and healthcare goes up 10%, the wheels come off the bus, right? And that's happening all around the state.
I know you guys are down there advocating and you're getting more people involved. Like, what does that look like? How often are you guys down there? What are you talking about? How are they responding?
So this is issue number 1 for Easton and has been forever. When we are in touch with our legislators, this has always been, for both the superintendent and for myself, the top issue is Chapter 70 funding formulas, unrestricted government funding formulas. Now that it's so widespread and is causing so much disruption, it is now on everyone's radar. It's now being covered in the Globe. It is being covered. The MTA is working with the Mass Superintendents Association and other management and labor groups working together to advocate for a better level of minimum aid funding, because this impacts all of us. This impacts every department. And if minimum aid continues to be, it was improved last year. It was funded at $100, which is appreciated. But that's an incremental improvement that had that changed a decade ago, maybe the trajectory would be different. But this is a very bad situation for the entire state. So something's going to have to give. So the legislators are aware of it. I'm part of the Mass Municipal Association. I'm on the statewide financial policy commission that drafts resolutions on behalf of all 351 cities and towns of the state to prioritize the lobbying to the state of what are our priorities. I'm one member of many. I don't get to pick it myself, but minimum aid, circuit breaker funding for special education, out of district transportation costs, creation of a municipal building funding program have been on the statewide municipal association's financial resolutions to the governor and the legislators for years now. So we have seen some incremental improvements. Again, we didn't get 30. We received 100. The governor's proposal this year started at 75. We are lobbying our lawmakers now to have that at minimum match last year at over 100. But that we are constantly in touch with them, and
Is there talk of changing the formula?
It depends on who you ask. There are certainly organizations advocating for that. Now, late Representative Carol Doherty did file a budget amendment years ago at a request of Superintendent Cabral to form a state commission to do that. It did not pass. And just former Senator Timilty also would file amendments to try to change Easton's wage adjustment factor, which is this arcane multiplier baked somewhere in that formula that spreadsheet says that Easton schools don't pay in the same labor market as Mansfield, even though we literally border them, and that also failed. So we are trying. I appreciate the question because I think it's important for people here, but also at home to know, like, we are constantly in contact with state leadership advocating for these things. And the sad irony is now that it's not the anomaly and this is everywhere, now it's an inescapable discussion. Wendy?
Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to add about that wage adjustment factor. That's been an issue since day one with ed reform. Back in the day, you could have a wage adjustment factor that was actually less than a 1, and Easton was less than a 1. And after many years of lobbying to increase that, they just made everybody a 1. That wage adjustment factor has really hurt Easton since the beginning of ed reform back in the 90s.
Okay, I was going to say for those who are not familiar, ed reform was in the 90s.
Yeah.
So ed reform was in the 90s, and it took until the Student Opportunity Act, which I think was 5 years ago, was the first real major renovation of that. So if history informs the present, I wouldn't assume, I can't speak for the legislature, of course, but it took a very long time to get to the Student Opportunity Act, but there is a lot of pressure and a lot of attention on it because this is over time, this will become existential. The forces, like, part of Easton making it 19 years without an override is because we were in a unusually long stretch of low inflation and low interest environment that is just gone.
Right.
And now that the majority of schools in the state, the overwhelming majority of public students in Massachusetts now, this is the normal. It's community, and Tom and Nancy will talk about this. The override that PACE is recommending it doesn't take Easton from where we are now and go for gold. It kind of rights the ship and stabilizes things for a few years. Most communities cannot just have overrides every 3 years, and so these funding formulas are really putting communities and schools in a really hard spot.
It's 351 cities and towns. How many are minimum aid right now? Do we have that number?
77% of school districts are now minimum aid.
Yeah.
77.
77%. Yeah.
The pool is getting bigger.
And 5 years ago, it was like just a few, right? Just a
I
handful.
think the number of minimum aid districts used to be in the double digits, and compared to now hundreds.
Yeah.
And there's a variety of things informing that, including that enrollment is declining in most communities around the state. Birth rates are declining in the state and most United States because the cost of living is completely unsustainable and people can't afford families, right? I don't want to get completely hopeless on all of you, so that's not something.
But state revenues are up overall. Like that's the thing I have trouble understanding is why isn't more of that going to the towns?
So they're during the pandemic, and Wendy and I used to kind of cynically use the phrase like all the money, because state revenue is much more elastic than municipal revenue, right? So a lot of state revenues are tied like a sales tax. Sales tax is flat, but if it's on the cost of goods and the price of goods go up 40%, state tax revenue is going to go up tremendously. Prop 2.5 has no inflation factor, right? So whether inflation's 1 or 10, like we're just humming along at 2.5. And so state revenue was growing 10% per year for multiple years in a row. We did lobby heavily that we wanted to capitalize as a municipal industry during that period of time to increase those revenue shares, because eventually, that's not going to sustain forever. Now state revenue is tightening significantly now. So we're in a situation where now the impact is broader. There's more more districts being impacted. So it's positive that means it's on everyone's radar. But downside is that means any meaningful increase becomes proportionally more expensive at a time that state revenue is also drying up. So it was a long way of saying, like, we will continue fighting and lobbying, but no one following Easton's budget process should hold out hope that the state is coming over the hill on horses. It's going to be us or no one. So this brings me to the end of the presentation, which is revenue. We sought an override in 2016, in part to mitigate the structural revenue gap caused by the topic of our discussion of state aid, which was cut in 2008 and took 8 years to recover in nominal dollars to where it used to be. That failed. Since then, we've adopted conservative operating budgets, and we've worked very hard to fortify our financial position. Some of our progress is shown here on screen. And it's certainly not to declare mission accomplished, everything's fine. It clearly is not. We still have a hard year in front of us, but the short version is that through our efforts over the past 9 years, our department leaders, budget managers, and Easton voters have for years adopted and supported tight budgets that allowed us to build our reserves. Those folks and the voters deserve credit because there were numerous very hard town meetings along the way around that. And we, because of that, will have the capacity to meaningfully blunt the impact of cuts next year, but not prevent them entirely. if it weren't for building our reserves to where they are now, the amount of cuts we were talking about would likely be double, if not worse. And
Sorry, we go back one slide. I wanted you, if you wouldn't mind, to blow out the last bullet. Commercial, industrial, personal property have contributed significantly to the new growth, right?
Right.
Despite the hindrances in that area.
yes.
I may not be, my eyes may not be open to it. Can you just blow out like what is actually come into the town besides the personal property, cars, things like that? Commercial, industrial side.
Yep.
I know we've got the car dealership now,
Yep.
but I've seen restaurants come and go. I've not seen any real significant industry coming into the town. But I may be blind to it, and
Yeah.
others in town may be blind to it as well.
So commercial includes things like restaurants, right? So with the occasional situation with like a lease going out, that it's more restaurants have come. They're not often going, right? So a lot of restaurants have come to town. Things like the industrial warehousing and logistics facility on 138, that's a very large commercial contributor. Walnut Tree was just approved for a facility on 138 as well. Things like contractor bays, retail shops, nothing like an Amazon factory or something like that,
Yeah, of
because there's just not enough land anywhere to do that. But so it would be restaurants. There's been retail, and some of that, contractor bays, storage, things like that, have contributed meaningfully to that.
Thank you.
So I think that is an important point, though, right? Because that's part of the perception of the challenge of the moment that we're in is, well, have we done the right things with growth? We always can do more. We're always working on it. But this is from the Department of Revenue, right? I mean, our taxable property has to get verified every year and sent to the state. And despite only 12% of our property being like the kind of baseline portfolio, so to speak, being commercial, industrial, personal property, nearly a third of our new growth in the past 5 years has come from that, which is good. That's what we want to see. The challenge is that once it's in that growth, the appreciation of those properties cannot keep up with residential, right? So I think some people might look at that and say, well, then why aren't we significantly moving to 80-20? And that's because residential properties are going up 10% a year. So we have to kind of continuously outperform on our CIP just to not fall backwards against residential values going up so fast every single year.
Yep. As I was preparing for this meeting, my bone to pick is more with the Economic Council, right? The Development Council. Going through the minutes, I just didn't see a whole lot of this. So it struck me in your presentation that there is more CIP than I'm aware of. And the minutes aren't reflecting that, but it's a different committee that I personally will get more involved with.
Sure.
To push, because I would prefer other people's money paying our bills versus ours.
Yes, and as you likely know, what the major hindrances to that haven't necessarily been anything that's the fault of the Economic Development Council. It's that until 10 years ago, we had no sewer in Easton, like literally zero,
absolutely.
right? And it's not, just like it's not an accident that as most of Massachusetts slides into minimum aid, overrides are exploding everywhere. This didn't happen by accident either, right? We can't take all the credit for it. There was broader macroeconomic things that were wind at our backs, but we built 3 sewer districts to make this possible, right? And it's not an accident that on the heels of us doing that, we've had our best years of new growth ever. It's a shame that those are starting to come to fruition as fixed costs explode and nullify what would have otherwise been the benefit. But yes, I'm glad you caught that, because I think that's worth pointing out. Because it doesn't necessarily, depending on what part of town you live in, how you drive to work or to drop your kids at school, it may not feel that way.
Yeah, no, and no means am I disparaging the Economic Development Council.
I appreciate that.
But they certainly have a lot of work on their hands in the next few years.
Yes, we have some really positive things happening in that regard as well. This winter, after working, obviously not me, I think in middle school 25 years ago, but the town has identified an intermunicipal agreement with Brockton for sewering the industrial park as priority number 1 for economic development for 25 plus years, and we have now negotiated and executed one. So that's great. That's going to take years to build out, but we've done it 3 times. I'd like to do it a 4th, and we're going to get to work on that. So that'll have a lot of upward growth capacity there for generations, which is a really, really positive thing.
Excellent, thank you.
Connor, do you think you can explain the 2 points above it as well? Because I know I've had a hard time understanding how
Sure.
2.5 works for a while, and I think it's worth explaining to everyone that it's not tied to the increases in your house value.
Sure, thank you. So that's a good question. So yeah, somebody might look at that and say this person is very obviously detached from reality if the word residential tax and low are in the same bullet. And again, this is the truth, which is that our tax rate, which is it's the mill rate, right? So the amount that is taxed per thousand of value on a home in Easton right now is the lowest that rate's been since 2009. Folks will correctly say, well, my tax bill's not lower. No, it's not. But values are up dramatically. And so the way that it works under Prop 2.5 is that, and this ties to sometimes people say, well, why don't you just shift the tax rate more onto business? That just redistributes where it's collected from. It doesn't increase the total amount collected. So we, through town meeting, we propose a budget. If town meeting adopts it, we then have to divide that budget out against the total value of property. And we have to look at value every year to make sure it's equitable and fair. And so if your budget's going up 2 or 3%, but your values go up 10%, then you, in order to make that match, if you kept your tax rate static while value went up 10%, our tax revenue would go up 10%, right? That would be like if we functioned like a sales tax. We don't. So what has to happen is that we have to lower the tax rate so that we're only collecting the 2.5% plus new growth of total revenue. I don't know. I'm glad Wendy is with me. Is that
That's accurate.
okay?
You can't increase the total.
More than
More than
2.5
what those limits
growth
are.
or an override.
I think maybe the easiest way to, because we talked about this last night at or not last night, it was a million years ago because it was Monday, that the overall levy, 2.5% plus new growth.
That's right.
Which means someone might see a reassessed value that is different, right? Because they're getting reassessed. There's been changes. There's been material changes in the house, whatever
Sure.
it might be. But the overall levy is still at that 2.5% plus new growth.
Plus growth. That's correct.
So that ends up being, for those of us that are thinking about it and going, well, mine went up last year, or mine went up 2 years in a row, based on the house next door to me sold for a huge amount of money, or whatever it might be. Someone in town might have the opposite. They might be in a different area of
That's right.
town where maybe there's not as much sales, there's not as much economic development, so their overall, because that levy is still balanced at 2.5%, it's a balance. It's not everybody automatically goes up to that.
Correct.
degree.
Yes. If your home value went up 12%, that doesn't mean every single house in Easton's value went up 12%. Right. And there are factors that contributed to that. You touched on them. We look at sales data every year. There's enough market comps in a town the size of Easton that we get that every year from MLS. But if you're living on a street and 3 or 4 homes sell, tear down, and rebuild at a much higher price over the course of a few years, that will raise your assessed value, just like it would likely raise the market value you could sell your property for, right? And so all of the things being equal, that may make your tax bill go up more than that 2.5 or 3.5, right? And you can see here our average in the past decade in Easton, our average tax bill, right? And that's the average of 800 bills. So not everyone's experience has been this.
Right.
But the average annual increase has been 3.5%, including Blanchard's. And in Massachusetts, on average, it's 4% a year. And that, again, depending on your house, you may say that there's no way that's true. But it depends on your neighborhood. It depends on, was your house assessed appropriately when it was purchased, right? It might have been undervalued. And so what we know, and we look at this every year when the select board sets the tax rate, we have the assessor come in and show these are the values by class. This is what has changed. For fiscal 25, I think the average tax bill increase was 2.8%, approximately. And so that means that if yours went up more than that, there's someone on the other side of that average that might have gone up less, right? But that was the mean increase, and so there's a lot of variables that go into it. But that's, if you look back a few years ago, our tax rate was $16 and change, and now it's 12 and change, and that's reflecting that we can't keep that static if it would bring our total tax revenue up greater than the 2.5% plus growth.
How do you explain to people if you're increasing the overall tax levy at 2.5%, how the average is then 2.8%?
It's 2.5% plus new growth. So the new growth fluctuates year to year. Some years it's 700,000, 800,000. Some years it's 1.5 million, like last year. So that could be the difference between 2.5 and 3.8 or 4% increase to your total tax levy.
The other thing that goes into that too is that if you have a debt exclusion and you have to raise those taxes, that amount goes on top of that
Right.
Prop 2.5 limit, and that amount can change from year to year.
Yeah.
There's a lot of factors that go into valuing a property, but the biggest driver of that is sales. And so if, condo sales go up, at a higher rate than residential property, then condos might experience a greater increase in value than residential homes.
Right.
And your property value is basically built through a series of tables in the assessor's database that factor in numerous things: the style of your house, the number of bathrooms you have, the grade of your house. So there's a lot of things that go into that. And so it's certainly very important to make sure that the assessor's office, you should look at your property card to make sure that what is on your property card is accurate.
Does that answer
Yeah.
your question? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to amplify that a little bit because this is to me a new piece of information which I think is critical. So before I do that, I just want to make sure I'm representing this correctly. That the when you factor in all of the vagaries of how we assess things, when you factor in debt exclusion overrides that we've had, that I think the past 10 years,
Yes.
Easton has grown by 3.5%,
On average,
but the Massachusetts state average
it's 4.
is 4.
Yes. In the budget memo, I am always very careful to cite my work for these things. There's a state data portal on this where you can go check. But yes, and to be clear, not the entire cost of some debt exclusions is fully online. So that will shift in the next couple of years. And so maybe we get closer to that 4%, but it's not going to go from a 10-year average of 3.5 to 5. Right.
So, and we're talking about tax growth.
But the growth of your tax bill.
Right. Yep.
Yep.
Yeah. It's like I said. I think that bears amplifying. It's a piece of information that I don't think has been widely discussed, and so I appreciate you mentioning it.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, and I mean, I think, again, the State Department of Revenue has really, really dramatically increased their data visualization of their data portals for all of us in recent years, which has been great, because you can go and pull this historical data, right? That you can look back in time that, Easton had the 65th highest tax bill in Massachusetts 4 years ago, and it's dropped 14 positions to 79th today, which is the lowest it's been since 2006 before the last override. The Department of Revenue looks at income, and you can look, and none of this means individual tax bills are not a burden, right? That's real, and that is dependent on very personal things in people's finances. But at a macro scale, this stuff is important, right? You can look and see that the tax burden, right, the function of what does a tax bill represent of the average income, has been going down. That doesn't mean that's been everyone's experience, right? So anyone wants to say, I don't want to sound cold like that. There are people that is absolutely not true, right? That's why we need to grow programs for financial assistance and financial relief. And I know members have asked about that. I know about the chief assessor and the director of health and community services are actually at the Lions Club tonight talking all about that, because that's obviously an area of concern as we've had debt exclusions and we're considering an override. But yes, the macro, these are macro level facts from the Massachusetts Department of Revenue.
Thank you.
Thank you. So because of fortifying our financial position, we're in a position where we can leverage a substantial amount of stabilization funds next year. This is not a solve. This reduces the severity of cuts. And so we're proposing near the policy cap of nearly a third of the balance, which would be 2.37 million. Coupled with free cash, this represents about 3.5 million of reserves, which is 3.3%-ish of our operating budget. That is not where you want to be as an organization.
What does that leave us with?
It will leave the stabilization fund balance at, 4.63 million?
So you can't do this again next year?
No, not at this level. right? And so that's a really important fact here, is that this necessarily cannot be done for multiple years. Even if you wanted to leverage a third, it would be a third off of, it would mean a third of 4.6, you're talking 1.5 million. That's a already $800,000+ reduction compared to what we're doing now. And so this is meant to mitigate the damage. It's why you build these reserves. But we should all understand that absent an override, reserve use is basically a baked-in cut for next year.
Any, for Wendy, no anticipated, bond rating hit from drawing down the stabilization fund?
And I wouldn't say that. I don't know if you have it. I mean, that's a real risk.
That is a risk.
All right, thank you.
No, I mean, that's one of the reasons sometimes folks, and that's why this cutout is up here, because sometimes there are people who, you know, you look at a $6-point-something million shortfall and $7 million in stabilization and say, well, to solve your problem, like, what are we doing here? And you can't rely on that one-time money cyclically, and you also can't send up a signal flare to ratings agencies that you are continuously budgeting expenses beyond your ability to fund them. And so I don't think that should go without saying either, that 9 years ago we had 1.5 or 1.6 million in stabilization, and we've worked very, very hard. And we've had for some of you, while you were on this committee, hard town meetings where folks wanted to see better services for the schools or for the police department, and proposed putting additional reserves into the budget, where we had to have really hard conversations about how we want those departments to have these things, but that's not the way to get there, because you can't sustain it. So that is a risk, yes.
Yeah, I mean, if you have 2 successive years like this, then
Right.
I also think we knew
serious jeopardy.
that this was coming, and so that's one of the reasons why we were building up the reserve so much, right?
Correct, yes. I mean, we and that is a question that's come up
Not
a lot,
to this
right?
level
As
with the insurance premiums and stuff, but we knew that things were going to get tough, right?
right, at some point, the Prop 2.5 system, if your largest revenue is growing up 2.5%, even with new growth, and your second largest revenue is going up 1%, you can only make it so far, even in relatively non-inflationary times. And so we, you know, and this question's come up a lot with, and that's why I kind of included in here talking about debt exclusions. There are folks tuning in now and maybe coming into this anew and saying, well, why did we do those? Why didn't we do an override first? We tried. And we needed the override in 2016. It is a community and a voter decision that, whether that passes or not, one that we respect and made do with clearly, I think, for 9 years. That doesn't mean the financial necessity didn't exist, right? And so we've adopted substantially more conservative operating budgets. You know, there are a lot of years there was 1% budgets, 2.5% department increases, 3%, and we have not funded the departments where outside of just kind of a reactionary posture, and try to do the best we can with what we have. So we did, and that's, didn't they know this was coming? Yes, that's why we built up such a sizable amount of reserves. And to your point, regrettably, just what's happening now is not, there's not precedent for this. This is not like a few bad years of 5%. This is numerous fixed costs going up 10, 15, 20. And there's only so much you could do with planning. I mean,
Right. I just also want to add, you know, last year was not an easy budget year either. It did take a while to get that budget over the finish line, and and not without use of stabilization.
Right.
In this fiscal year's budget. We basically have gotten to the point where we were before the pandemic. I mean, before the pandemic, we were at like 1.8 million in free cash certifications. Everything was getting, the margins were getting narrower, and we're there again, but with the inflation that we didn't have before.
yeah, we still have the same constraints on the revenue growth, but now the expenses are just in another universe.
Yeah.
So we've made important progress. We haven't reached balance yet. The next major department budget revision will be the schools, which will be presented to the school committee next week. Assuming after that presentation we've reached a balanced budget, that will serve as the basis of the April 29th hearing for the non-override budget for you folks and the select board. And it will also serve as the floor upon which we will build an override contingent budget reflective of PACE's recommendation, which we will work with the schools to have as an alternative budget by the time of your hearing, so that folks are not learning of that at town meeting on May 19th. I think people will want and ought to have that side by side to understand what does one do and what does the other do. From there, it will be.
Sorry, just one question on that. So is the expectation then, because numbers are still pretty much in flux right now, that the 29th meeting would be it's joint, we would probably vote on, if we haven't already had the final, we'll already have the final non-override budget. But the override budget would be, the expectation is to voting on for a deliberation and vote for the 29th.
That is my hope. Yep. And we're going to work really hard. There's not a lot of time between now and then, but.
So let me understand this, so on the 29th, budgets.
Plan.
Any idea when last year did we find out that the amount was increased to $100 per student? Was it in the April timeframe or?
Questions?
Right.
It was right around.
I remember it being right at the end of the process.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
So it could be, and that's one of the challenges. Massachusetts adopts a state budget, one of the latest in America. So we almost never have a final state budget when we're at town meeting. So we don't know. If that happens, it would at that point just be a proposal at the House or Senate level. It has to then go through reconciliation before getting signed into law. If we end up in a place over the summer where the governor is signing a budget into law that's at 100 instead of 75, that's positive, but the dollar impact there is like probably 90,000 against 110 million. So that will perhaps reduce 90,000 of stabilization, but it won't change our fate.
Yeah.
$30 is worth $100,000.
Yeah. So it goes
If
from.
it goes to 100, you'll get $300,000.
Sir, if you could move to the microphone.
Sorry, 28 arm lane.
So yes, we hope to have both budgets for that hearing, and to seek your recommendations that night. And so we're going to try and position you to feel comfortable with that and not give it to you that day. Yeah, which, just for the record, is not what I don't do. I haven't done in the past, but we'll get you the balanced one. We won't, like, if the balanced one's ready, we'll send that to you in advance. I think I can't, obviously, we're still not at balance, and I won't speak for the schools because they are not here. But one of the things that's really important and different about this time versus 2016 that Tom and Nancy will speak about is building a contingent budget isn't going to be like this start over process and think about all the proactive things. Like it's really a sustaining what we're doing, right? So it doesn't mean it's not work. It doesn't mean it's not moving pieces. But it's not like in 2016 where that sought to do a couple of things, fix for revenue gap and improve some things. This would really largely be focused on sustaining. And so that's more of a known quantity. So I
that point, are you
feel
going to
optimistic that we can get something for you.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Are you going to have a capital budget? I assume the capital budget's going to be significantly earlier than that.
It will be scaled back quite a bit.
Right. So you probably have that. That's much more consumable.
Yes, I suppose it would probably be good for Finance Committee to have another meeting before the 29th.
That's the plan,
so for the more routine business items, because and again, this is just my opinion. It is in the select board's hearing. I think we are all well served to have that hearing be focused on what. I don't think folks are going to want to go in if they are getting babysitters or whatever to hear about like a printer being purchased. So for more routine business. If we could have one more meeting before then would be great. And if you tell us when that is, then we will make sure we have what you need.
Because I think outside of, the vast majority, from 7 on, we have most of them. Like I think there's an injured on duty fund placeholder that's still sitting out there that I don't know we have yet. But like, I think we can get through a bunch of stuff tonight, and then I agree with you. We might have one more to.
We have some work to do on those things, and we will hustle as much as we always do and try to get you what you need.
Thank you.
So after the 29th, at that point, it's largely in the hands of voters. We will have the town meeting is May 19th. As you've seen, the warrant is quite scaled back. Planning board has decided they are going to hold off on submitting any kind of zoning, so the focus can be on the budget. CPA is really scaled back, so it's I think we're clearing the field. We all know what's at stake. So we'll have town meeting on the 19th. And then I've obviously not updated this since Monday. The select board has scheduled the override election. It will be June 10th. With Carol Doherty's passing, the state has scheduled a special election that day. And we felt not just reducing the cost of running multiple, because there's also a special primary. So there's a town election in April, a special primary in May, town meeting in May, and then an election in June. So it's 5 in like a 6 or so week period for the clerk's office to run. We thought it would hopefully reduce voter confusion of not having numerous elections within a couple weeks of each other. So it will be June 10th from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. at OA.
Do you have a printing cutoff date for the warrant article stuff for our deliberation and votes for
Sorry, I'm operating
sometime
on
after
like
the 29th? But
4 hours in front of me right now.
you can't come up with that one tiny data point? Oh, Connor, I mean, come on. Anyway, back to
I
your
will get it too.
2.2 million deficit. Let's go.
So, so we're 10 weeks out.
Yeah.
I appreciate you. I really sped through this as select board. This was nowhere near as long there. So sorry about that. I hope this was helpful. If you have any more questions, I'm happy to take them. I'll be here through Tom and Nancy's. I'll go get the warrants, things like that. But I appreciate your engagement.
Any other questions for Connor? All right.
Thank you.
Wendy, while you're sitting there, do we want to do the transfer requests? Do we want to just jump around completely and make this entire agenda a mockery?
Sure. Does everybody have a copy of that? I brought extras.
We
in
have
case,
copies. Do we have copies up here? No. Do you have copies? We have it digitally, right? That went around. You sent it yesterday, maybe? Thanks, Connor. See you in a minute.
Do you all have the warrant digitally, or did you need a couple more copies?
We have. Nope, we don't have digital copies. I have it digitally. I've sent it around. Does everyone else have it digitally?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think we're good. Have at it, Wendy. Tell us about this transfer.
Okay, so we are requesting a transfer for the assessing department of $27,000. This will cover the additional overtime and the interim assessing services that were required this fall to fill in the gap between when the assessor, our assessor left and we hired a new assessor. And these costs were needed in order to keep the reval on track. It was a very tricky time. We were still able to, because of this, get the reval completed, get it certified by the Department of Revenue, have our classification hearing on December, I think it was like 2nd or 3rd, with the select board, get the tax rate set and the bills out on time. So it was a concerted effort, but we were able to get it done. Happy to say we were able to get it done. We were able to get growth at 1.5 million, which was the highest in a long time. And but this is what it took to get it done. You'll see that the balance in some of these lines are a little bit greater than the reserve request ask, and that's because there's a couple of other lines that we can manage within the bottom line to reduce that ask.
So let me ask Wendy, so I'm not sure I understand this. It says overtime 8,800, and then interim
Yes.
assessing services
Yeah.
18,200.
Yes,
That's what's to be transferred? Is that correct?
yes,
Are we looking at presented balance?
yes.
Okay.
Those two added together is the 27,000. Those would be the lines.
Yeah, got it, sorry.
Yep.
Should be the one by one.
Any questions for Wendy about this request?
So will overtime just due to time or just a transition?
It was a combination of things. So the assistant assessor obviously had to put in a lot more hours so that we could get all of the information into the system to get it to the Department of Revenue. And because the interim assessor that we did have, came in several days during the week, but wasn't there full time.
So I have a quick question, Wendy. Appropriation 5301, is that a payroll account?
No, that is the interim assessing services line.
Okay,
It's a purchase of services.
okay, and then 5130
The 5130 is the overtime account.
is the payroll account.
Yes, that is a payroll
Okay.
account.
And so we're taking all of the funds out of 5301, almost all of the funds out of 5301. What else is that appropriation used for?
The 5301, that actually, there was no, we set up that line so that we could isolate the costs of the interim assessing services. So basically, because the budget is a bottom line budget, there is no budget in that line.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? I'm not looking around, so just yell them out.
Motion to approve the request.
Second.
Oh, who do I go with when they're in the same room? Okay. There's the Peter on motion. We'll say Jenkins on a second. All right, all those in favor, show of hands. Any opposed? Unanimous.
Thank you very much.
You, Wendy.
Wendy.
All right, next up on our agenda, we've got two people that I've spent far too much time with recently. Our chair and vice chair of the PACE committee. To be fair, they've spent too much time with me. I have enjoyed the time I've spent with them. Oh yeah. I do have a pen on me. Yes, I do. So, while I remember that I have to actually physically sign these in person, PACE committee, chair and vice chair, my friend and yours, feel free to dive into your presentation.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. It's really great to be here and to see you all again. We don't have a voluminous presentation today. I think as everybody has probably seen, there are a lot of information on our website. There are a lot of presentations at the Queeset House, at Blanche Ames. But we do have support information in case there are questions. But today, honestly, is us fulfilling our charge. We have to come before the select board and certainly you folks to let you know what our final recommendation is. We also want to make sure that we let you know about a community compact that we at PACE have recommended as a result of our overall recommendation. And really what that is a covenant with the residents that we feel it would be appropriate to consider. So those are the two main items that we're going to talk about tonight. The first slide that we're going to call up is one that hopefully you have seen if you were at the Blanche Ames meeting or looked at any of our materials. And the reason why we keep this up is this actually is what we are talking about. Our budget is simply a financial way to communicate the policies and values that Easton holds dear. And these are the items that through our travels and speaking with many people and through our research and comparing ourselves to communities and through our research of understanding how we spend, these are realities. We are a community that deeply values green space. We hear that, we see that. We hear it from people. We see it in the fact that 1/3 of our community is protected from tax because we have conserved space, or we have wetlands, or we have nonprofits like Stonehill. And when we ask residents the thing they most value about Easton, that is the #1 thing that they say is open space and recreation. The other thing, obviously, is his history, the historical context of Easton. There are inimitable things that we as a community value. And that's really what the budget communicates. How you spend and allocate your resources supports that. The other thing that I'd just point out, if I could, on this slide is also just that the residents, when we talked to them, pointed out that they also, when we said what's the challenge, was new growth. And so that's really the intro, and I know we talked about it, but those are at odds with each other. We often say, hypothetically, I'll give you an example, actually not hypothetically. We say we want new growth. We want it to be commercial. And I don't know if you all were able to jump on the planning board's meeting regarding the Taco Bell and the Chipotle at Five Corners, but there were 30 people there that didn't want to drive through and didn't want the traffic. And I appreciate that. That's their right to advocate for that. When we wanted to have a marijuana facility, there were people that said, we don't want that in our community. So we, in our budget, as a community, and we as a PACE committee, really appreciated that our residents are speaking to us and have really shown us that nobody is at fault through this process. So what I mean by that is we will show you, and we have shown you, and we can tell you categorically and look you in the eye at any point and then tell you we don't spend more money than our comparable communities, than our surrounding towns. We don't have more people. We have less. You saw Connor put up statistics earlier. So we're not wasting your money as a town or as a school system. I can tell you that factually from a data perspective, any way you'd like to look at it. We've dedicated hundreds of hours, in aggregate thousands of hours, to review that. The other thing is, we love a community that preserves open space, that preserves what makes Easton unique. We are a farm-oriented community from a historical perspective. We welcome that. We support the CPA because we know that it supports historical open space and recreation. And that has created a home value that is higher than all of our neighboring communities except for one. So it's not a bad thing. Nobody has done anything wrong, and we think that's very important to take away. The other thing that we'd say is they didn't do anything. If anybody that you talk to is saying they, I would encourage you to make sure that we appreciate we as a community at PACE are resident-led. We take ownership of our budget. We as residents vote for it. We as residents decide what we want for planning and policies. So we have been trying to change the narrative to empower our residents to understand that it's not they have wasted our money. No, they have actually more efficiently spent your money on average than virtually any community that you compare us against. We have decided to have a community that supports schools, public safety, open space, recreation, and as a result, our home values are the second highest of all of them. That's a good thing. Regrettably, and I think you'll see this, being a residential forward community means, by definition, 72% of our income comes from property taxes. By definition, it's constrained by 2.5% increase, except for new growth. We all just said, well, we like new growth, not really. We haven't changed our plot size to be smaller. We have thankfully introduced small community planning, which I give credit. That was 5 to 7 years in the making for those locations. There were a lot of people that didn't like that, just for the record, and they sold out right away because to get into Easton at an affordable price point is very difficult. So we just want to make sure that you folks understand that we are really focused on ensuring people are informed, that they understand that we have what we have created from a policy situation going all the way back to the 70s when people voted not to take federal government funds to install a sewer. I'm not judging them at all, but if they had, 85% of that project would have been covered and it would have completely taken care of the entire town. That's what the reimbursement rates were from the federal government back then. But the things we have done make Easton very special. Those are the things I believe that PACE committee are, to bring it full circle, very concerned about. That we will begin to lose things that make Easton incredibly special, that are inimitable, that make us stand out, that make us who we are, the very fabric of who Easton is. So, next slide. I'll walk us through just in terms of some of the revenue challenges. Again, this is what you've heard, but a lot of this isn't new, and some of it is very new and acute. The rolling off of COVID-related relief programs, the focus on this and why it's important. So in 2016, we had an operational override that did not pass. In 2017, we executed an operational expense review that reaffirmed that we don't spend a lot of money. In 2020, the budget subcommittee, not sure if you know, but on March 7th, our meeting, literally voted to recommend an override, that the select board go and make an override. That's the charge of the budget subcommittee, to look out at financial pictures. And on March 20th, the world shut down. We were able to carry through for a series of years because we were able to receive a lot of funding. Inflation was still low, federal government funds flowed, They were all used appropriately. They were all used well, but it helped cover up the fundamental challenge that we have in that once you enter a high inflation environment and you are a residential forward community, you are stuck with a math problem. Your 72% of your revenue can only increase by 2.5% on average. The rest of our revenue, as you know, from the state perspective, unrestricted government aid, the dollar amount, not even worrying about percentage or inflation adjustment, the dollar amount is below 2008 dollar numbers. We haven't even talked in our presentations about what the roadway funds, Chapter 90 funds look like. And we talk a lot about dollars, so I'm going to try to add some context. Whether it's $30 from the Chapter 70 fund or 100, I can tell you that makes zero difference to the fundamental equation. $30 gets you 0.2% increase on that revenue. $100 gets you 0.65. So if your revenue piece is going up by 0.65%, but people want to get paid more than that, or you have utility bills that go up, or transportation contracts that get negotiated, the state has effectively told you, I'm sure you have come to this conclusion, has effectively told you as a town of Easton, you have a mechanism to figure this out. It is in your court. They are not increasing the amount of money that they're giving you. Effectively, it's less. It was 25 cents for every dollar back in, sorry, I'm going to ask, 25 cents for every dollar 10 years ago?
It was closer to 15, but
Sorry, 15?
So like 2008 pre-financial crisis, it was about a quarter.
Thank you. It's 13 cents. So the only way you fill that gap is yourself, because you're not getting it from someplace else. Especially, again, we're a residential forward community. We should definitely build out the industrial park. You absolutely should. It should be a focus. Every acre should be used. You need that to simply create a new growth trend that enables you to maintain a residential forward posture in the rest of your town. It's just a math thing. So absolutely all for it. Every single ounce of land you should. There are 2 other parcels that are buildable over 13 acres. So you're not getting a giant industrial park. Amazon's not coming to fundamentally change your tax structure. It just can't. And those are just realities that we have come to appreciate. The other components that we want to talk about just on the expense side, cost inflation clearly is 2.5%. We've said it's not overspending. Utilities, healthcare costs, transportation, repair maintenance costs, those all are at a much accelerated rate than 2.5%. And as a matter of fact, we showed that $3.6 million increase just on the fixed cost of health insurance and benefits. This is a great opportunity to give you context when people say a number and, look, 7 million is a high number, right? And it's real what the impact will be on our residents. But just factor 2 things, if you don't mind. One, that if that is passed, that the first chunk of that money goes to not using your stabilization funds. So you're already going to lose 2.5 million, 3.3 million with free cash, 3.5 of the 7.2. So half of it doesn't get you more. It just says you won't spend your savings, right? Which is good. We had a lot of slides up that talked about we spend $98 per capita. Per capita is per resident, Connor? And we have 25,000 residents. Okay. So if we just spent to the next comparable community, not to the average, not to the state average, just the next community up on the rung, that would be $15 more per capita for police, $32 more for fire, $47 more for general government. Doesn't sound like much. That's $2.4 million. So I just want to use that to illustrate, we are not getting you more. This is only about preserving what you have. We will not get to state averages. We will not get to the average of our comparable communities. We will not get to the average of our surrounding communities. We will be far away. We will remain farther away from them. So when people ask the context or the amount, I hope that helps you make it real that our problem isn't that we spend a lot, and our problem isn't that our people don't pay a lot of taxes. Just you'll see that. But our people pay the second highest amount of taxes in all of our surrounding communities. So it's real. This is a This is just a scales equation of balancing that is so difficult. I will say, when people simply, I know a lot of people want to hear in on this. So I get it. I know. Look, internet's probably crashing too. Happened last time. But when people say that, you have to just give them context. We have the second highest home value of all of our surrounding communities. It makes sense that we would have a higher dollar tax. We have residential, single-family home forward community. We asked for that. We've got what we asked for. The problem is that doesn't flex. That's a huge problem. We're not the state. We can't borrow money. Our sales tax receipts don't go up because the price of goods go up. Literally, the equation is not helpful for communities like Easton. And a lot of communities. We're not alone. Boston's looking to close 4 schools. I don't know if you just saw that, but there are 4 schools that will be looking to be closed. They are one of 36 communities that benefit from the state aid of Chapter 70. While there might be a few more that are minimum aid, they're not benefiting. Last year, 36 communities benefited from the increase in spend of Chapter 70, which means 325, 15 communities did not benefit from the increases. That's just overwhelming of the state posture. Sure.
Can I ask you and Connor a quick question?
No.
And tell me, if maybe we need a sidebar, right?
Sure.
Can we do a side?
I don't know if you can.
Well, you have to hear the question, right? So it's 7 million, right? The revised deficit on memo 1 is 5.4 million.
Yeah.
Does that include stabilization fund, the 5.4?
No, it doesn't. And I appreciate you asking because this comes up a lot. As people follow the iterative process, they say, well, the deficit's getting smaller. Why is the override number bigger? Right?
That's part. I just wanted to do the equation.
Yes.
Just a little bit differently. So Tom just said it's about 7 million. However, 3.5 of that, right, goes into the stabilization fund.
It doesn't go in. It wouldn't go into it. So,
Stop
so we're gonna work back, right? So, change memo 1 already started cutting budgets and cutting jobs. The first budget memo that came out, I identified the deficit next year as 6.36 million, but that was already using 1.1 million in free cash, which is reserves. So the accounting based deficit next year was arguably 7.46 million, which
Okay.
is very close to this.
Okay, so that's the number that you're looking for.
We arrived at our number not just because we got a budget number. We
Okay.
arrived at our number by looking at years, tens of years of trends of cost
Right.
structure, of trying to understand what future 3 to 5 years might look like, by hoping, again, the community compact will lean into this a little bit, but the amount that 7.3 million gets you for runway is not 5 years.
Right.
It might get you 3.
Right. So that's what I'm trying
And
to.
it still includes cuts, and it still includes the fact that you have to ramp up new growth,
Right.
and it still includes that there would be other challenges that we still need our town to run very efficient, lean, and make tough decisions in a short period of time to come.
Okay, so the 7.2, 7.3 leaves the savings intact, which is what number?
3.5 million between.
So there's 7 million in stabilization now. Without the override, I'm proposing using 2.37. So this remains to be seen, but I obviously have quite a large hand in building the budget.
Right.
It would make no sense to have the override contingent budget still have $1 of reserves in it. Right. So
Okay.
my recommendation would be that's item number 1 that we address in the contingent budget. So I would want to have no stabilization being used in that,
Right.
which would keep the balance where it is, and to pull all the free cash out of the budget as well, because it ought not be in there. We should not have free cash in the operating budget. That should be going to capital needs and
Right.
building stabilization further, funding long-term OPEB, things like that.
Okay.
So we'd go from 3.5 million to 0.
Okay.
Yep.
And then, estimate-wise, how long do we think the override would last for? Like year and a half,
So,
two?
great question. So we, thanks to Wendy, developed, and we shared it with you as well, a sheet that gave you the ability to build your own model for the next
Yes.
5 years.
Yes,
So-
but I did not, but yes, I got
No,
it.
that's okay. That's okay. You can, because it's art. I mean that
Yes.
sincerely. So I've done budgeting for, as you know, 20, 25 years. I can tell you pretty accurately what the next quarter looks like, next half year looks like. I can tell you decently what the next year looks like. Second year, you start to lose a little validity by the time you get to the end of it. Usually 18-month forecasts are the most accurate historically. By the time you get to the fifth year, you're hoping things average out, meaning you're using trends of, look, over the last 25 years, my expense structure has gone up this, my revenue has gone up that. I hope we're in the ballpark. But if you plan your expense structure to be average and it shoots through the roof like the last 2 years, and you plan your revenue to be average and it falls through the floor because interest rates are up, people aren't investing, and you have a environment that is uncertain. Uncertainty creates so much disinvestment. It is crazy, I can tell you that. People buy, from everything buying less lunches to building less buildings. Uncertainty is a horrible, horrible, nasty swear word. I mean that for economic growth. It's
Right.
just, it's a killer. So if that happens over the next 3 years, whereby expenses continue to accelerate at a 10 to 12% for your health insurance, which is one of our largest costs, and your revenue is fixed at 2.5%, and let alone that, but other revenue sources stagnate or decrease, you'll be in trouble in 3 years. Our community, we should all appreciate this. Our community will always have to do this exercise every 5 years. There's no way you have 72% of your revenue at 2.5% increase. And because you can't change the equation. You can't build enough new stuff in our town that all of a sudden we have income streams like a Gillette Stadium. Avalon is your largest taxpayer. The second largest is the natural gas on 106 across the street from Dance Express, for anybody else that has taken their daughter there.
It's not just
Or
our
sorry.
community though, right? I mean, the state, this Prop 2.5 limits all communities.
The state.
What's
How-
the average for most communities, do you know?
Average overrides or?
Yeah, how often they have to do an override?
Some communities do it every 5 years.
Yeah.
You know, have gone this,
Since our last one, Sharon's had like
We've had
yes.
7, I
Yeah.
think, 6 or 7 since our
I mean,
last override.
Since our last
in our
ones.
comparable communities, we have gone the second longest without one at 19 years. Back to 2006, it's,
Before, and this might even be precise, before the past 2 years on average, around the state, there was, I think, between 250 and 300 override attempts every year. And now, or sorry, no, that was over 10 years, and it has since doubled the rate. So there's 60 or so being sought every year.
Yeah.
that's in the Blanche Ames presentation slide, if you want to go back to the PACE thing and look at that huge acceleration. I mean, in communities like Natick, that has an incredible commercial base of shopping, they're going for an override this year. Boston School's
Southern
closing. It's really unprecedented because
Yeah.
of these dynamics, so.
Just to double click into something you said, just to make sure we have
Please.
a clarification on it.
Sure.
The exercise, you said every 5 years, towns like ours are going to have to go through this exercise. The exercise is this type of true deep dive into the financials, talking about the overall structure, is an override an appropriate thing, etc. Not literally, just to call it out for anybody that might be watching.
Good call.
It's not an override every 5 years. We're
No.
not suggesting that or even hinting at that. It's
Yeah.
that the deeper understanding of the fiscal, I hate the term,
Realities.
cliffs, realities is
Realities.
better. Thank you. The fiscal realities we're facing require this type of sensitive yet deep dive investigation every however many years.
Yep. Regardless of how the vote goes, we hope what this does is drives engagement on discussions like what should our lot size be? What should our conservation boundaries be? We all love our community because of those things. So I am not targeting them in any way, shape, or form. However, if that's what you want and ask for, you have to, if that's the ingredients in the meal, you have to accept what you get to eat. And that's just, I think, educating people to understand that. We want to make sure we're encouraging new growth. You have to have it. You need more car dealerships in the right places, in the right way. You need more targets. Like, all those things are good. But for the most part, a lot of people don't want smaller lot sizes. They aren't necessarily pro apartment building.
Multi-dwelling houses,
right?
yeah.
Multi-dwelling homes. So I think it's hopefully every 4 or 5 years and the budget subcommittee is a vehicle to do this. PACE, I think, was great because of the cross-section, resident-led, 19 people really tussling to get to a good place. But I would just encourage you to keep having this dialogue. As finance committee, people still say that they're surprised, and I get it. Like, it's hard to engage when you have family, kids, you're working, you're busy, but we really need the community to understand that while everything looks great and we love going to Langwater Farm and having pizza night, and it seems like Easton has, everything's perfect. It's a lot of hard work that goes on behind the scenes and a lot of things that we don't necessarily control or that take years of planning to make it look this way. You asked Shireen, I just want to go back to one thing. It's really important that you folks make real for who you speak to. So we have been getting closer on our budget deficit. I need you to know that we're getting closer because at times we will now have 1 ambulance,
Right.
not
Right.
2.
Right.
The cuts are.
I need you to know that. I need you to know you can't walk down the hallway, and I'm only looking at you because you're the question, but you can't walk down the hallway and pay your bill whenever you want anymore. You need to know that these things are real. You won't have potentially a town pool next year. And I think for all of us, we're at the age where we probably have kids or had kids that went there, and we were so grateful as parents. Those are things that you can't compete with, I think, when you think of places to live. You won't have touch a truck. You won't have emergency response like you do. So I guess the last thing I'll say is we have really over-indexed on thinking about people. There are a tremendous amount of people that are employed by our town that work for us, right? That live with us. They are our neighbors, our friends, our residents. They coach our kids. So we just want you to know we think about them in this conversation, in this dialogue, and we think about the people. There are people who cannot afford this increase. Don't think about that. No matter what happens, somebody is going to feel something that you cannot avoid them from feeling. They may not be able to afford to live here. They may lose their job. They may lose their job and pay more taxes to live here. So we have really over-indexed on that. That's why we have tried when people are really passionate about you're stealing money from me. I've heard it, just so that you know. Why aren't you asking for 12 million? Because they deserve it. I've heard that too. But what we try to encourage is curiosity. Just, you can ask us any question you want. We've looked at this from every way we possibly could. 19 people, not just myself. Teachers union, fire, police, residents, people that have no idea about business and financials, and people that do it every day.
People on their very first committee, I think, thinking they were joining something that would be an hour meeting a month and learn very quickly that's not the kind of time that we spent. Our 4.5-hour meetings twice a month. People have really dug in. Young families, retired people, nice cross section, which have made some really good conversations.
So with that, our official recommendation for you is that we have arrived at an $8.1 million size of challenge. We believe, candidly, that the problem is that we simply do not have enough revenue. That's why we're recommending largely a $7.3 million operational override. And on the expense side, that's a $0.8 million. So people have said, wow, how did you get that specific? We didn't. We were a democracy. That reflects the vote of 19 people. We asked everybody who was willing to give us what they thought the size of the challenge was and where it should be solved. And so this tells you 2 things. One, the spread of size of problem was between 7 and 9 million, which if you've ever worked in a committee with 19 people for 9 months, that's like unheard of to be so tight. So that's good. That means everybody saw the information the same way. They ultimately interpreted it the same way. And we were aligned on the size of the problem. And the fact that it so overly indexes on a revenue side solution means that we also virtually unanimously believed overwhelmingly that it was a revenue side problem. Now, I do want to emphasize, we pay the second highest on average tax bill, dollar tax bill, than all of our surrounding communities. So we know we're asking for more from the base that already feels the burden. we can't change that. You can't. The property taxes are 72%. The next largest one is government at 14%. You can't get there from here, if that makes sense. It's just math. So that's why I want to make sure people don't get angry, learn. However people vote in May, I support that. If people literally can't afford to pay for it, I get it. That's okay. The only thing I'll add is I would give them my counsel as a non-advisor. I can't think of a better place to invest my funds than a community that works hard to give back. Remember, we've given back $1,840 in utility savings because we aggregated all of that. I don't think people know that, that we literally put cash back in their pockets, that we have done more for less for 19 years. So whatever the vote comes, if they're educated and they're informed, I think we've done our job. But hopefully, again, you folks have access to so much of this information as well. I think that's all.
Yes, yeah,
I'm
thank
done.
you.
Fine.
Thank you. No, that's fine. That's great. So I want to talk about an additional thing that Pace did. In addition to fulfilling our charge, which was to come up with these recommendations after, as Tom said, an incredibly thorough study. And I want to emphasize that everyone on this Pace committee has unanimously come to the conclusion that this town issue, as has been said many times tonight, is not the result of any lack or problems with fiscal policies or fiscal management. 19 people, and there were some people who joined the committee who were skeptical. So it was really good to have that skepticism because people asked really hard questions, and yet everyone came to this conclusion after seeing this. And I think that's what Tom and I continue to hit in town when I go back into the schools to substitute, or we're at McDonald's, or Patrick and I at the library, and the people we're talking to, who come to us with questions about, where's the money, what happened, and who are so open to learning, this curiosity, when we start to go over these factors with them. So the additional thing that PACE did, and I think this is a really incredible tool that has been used by many other towns when they've had an override, is to offer a community compact. And what that compact does is, if it's signed by the major boards in town, so we're requesting that the Finance Committee be one of those boards. It was signed by the Select Board on Monday night and will be presenting to the School Committee tomorrow night, is that this committee, this compact, is not meant to point fingers, but what it does is give some extra assurance to folks who might be thinking, my gosh, what's going to happen with my money if I vote for this override? Will I continue to enjoy the same level of financial management and responsibility that we've had in this town? These are rigorous things. These things are going to be difficult for the town and school side to accomplish, but let me take you through a couple of these. So what we're saying is that this compact, 6 principles, would be put in place should the override pass, and that these objectives are aimed at encouraging a continued fiscal responsibility, promoting sustainable growth, and protecting the well-being of the town's residents. So looking at it from all of those lenses. Now, we also had to recognize that in the event of any extraordinary circumstances, like a natural disaster or a public health emergency, if the state puts some new requirement in place that we have to fulfill, or an economic crisis, that this might have to be looked at again, and one of the signatory boards, namely the Select Board, the School Committee, or the Finance Committee, could raise that issue. But it needs to be done at a public hearing so that the community could be part of that. So here are the first 2 of these. And you have the full memo in front of you, so I'm not going to read you the whole memo, but just a couple of highlights. The first one, I think, is akin to many of the questions you're asking about how sure is the community that this is not going to happen again in 2 or 3 years. And our hope is that this compact would be signed to commit to no debt exclusion override for 5 years. Again, we think that our buildings will be in really great shape after the public safety complex, and no operational override for at least 4 years. So this is what we're saying about how this discussion is going to need to happen again in at least that time frame if there are no other contingencies. And any exceptions to this would only be permitted under those extraordinary circumstances. Finally, and I think, Brian, this gets to your great comments about new growth, to enhance that Economic Development Council that already exists, to really focus on land use and infrastructure so that more pro-growth policies and procedures and practices could be implemented. We recognize the only way to sustainably increase the town's tax revenue other than additional overrides is to maximize this new growth. And so things like reforming that council to really make sure that they're bolstering growth efforts, including seats on that council for key land use and regulatory boards, and to just evaluate existing policies to see if there's any other areas to identify for improvement that would foster this pro-growth. And please stop me if you have any questions.
This is more of a question for Connor.
Thank you.
It's called the Economic Development Council. Is that just, it's a council, it seems like a kind of a country club kind of title. It'd be better served as being a board, like a finance committee or economic development committee, something a little bit more oomphy. I don't know, maybe I'm being nitpicky.
Yeah, I think
Council just comes off as like, maybe we'll do some stuff or get some coffee.
fair enough. I think it's somewhat a semantic decision, right? This council currently, it's not like this part of the pledge is not insinuating or suggesting like the EDC didn't do something that they ought to have done. They were more spun up as I don't want to say it's country club, but more as a marketing thing of, doing testimonials and things of our current folks who do invest in Easton and do have businesses in town. I don't know if the name makes a material difference, frankly. I think what is important is making sure that there's a good cross-section of those regulatory boards. And I think, Tom alluded to this, but this is not kind of pointing the finger at Concom or planning either, right? And sometimes folks do, right? That's something we heard a lot during PACE, which is, it's hard to get permits. And it's like, well, yeah, we have a lot of wetlands in Easton. We have very restrictive wetland bylaws that have been adopted by the community. Concom's job is to regulate them.
What's going to change then?
Well, so the hope, and Tom and Nancy, correct me if you think I'm wrong here, is we already have, the chairs of, and we spoke with the chairs of planning and Concom because they shouldn't find out about the suggestion when it's on TV, right? They're already looking forward, and they have in recent years started looking at areas and changing zoning, like in the Five Corners, right, where you are seeing development on 138 downtown. One of the things that I think is very important about a document like this is some of this is maybe things that these policy groups already wish to do, but Tom alluded to I think when things are abstractions, when we talk about growth as an abstraction, a lot of folks, if it's the abstraction of growth versus my taxes go up, everyone's like, well, yeah, do it. But then when it's real, that can be really hard. And so having something like this that would communicate from you as one of the chief elected boards to these other committees that say, this is a priority. This reflects what we heard. This came up constantly from citizens. This isn't just PACE sitting around saying this is great. This came up a lot. Codifying that and saying this is what we ought to be doing gives wind at the sails to those committees when they are prioritizing what types of zoning reform are we going to look at in the next year or two. This helps give some support. So I think that does make a change.
Will they have some goals around that?
The planning board already does set goals for themselves on what are they working on. That's also part of why they didn't submit zoning this spring. They see that this work is going on and they want to make sure that that's kind of hand in glove. We have a good relationship with them and work with them. It wasn't by accident that we zoned up for more density in the same spots we were building sewer, but we need to do more of that. And to Tom's point, those were not always celebrated or easy. Some of the most intense public meetings outside of overrides are when you're trying to build large sewer districts. Those are really, that puts a big burden on people in those areas. And so it's important when again, this is just my opinion as one member of PACE, but as a professional here, much like it was important that the operational audit came back and said, hey, this is not the town administrator investigating his own work and saying it's great, right? This is a group of other people took a look at this and think these things are priorities, that if we don't want to be in a situation of doing overrides every few years, we really do need to lean into some of these things. That doesn't just mean like grow and go 6 stories tall everywhere in town, right? For anyone who's listening at home. But I think there's tremendous value to this. Ultimately, it can't change without going back through town meeting, right? and they're the final say on things like zoning. But I think there's a lot of value to edify the folks that we heard from throughout this process who understood that there is a trade-off right now with a lot of very conservation-minded, preservation-minded regulatory frameworks that we have, that we've adopted, and wanting more growth. So I think that makes change possible. It doesn't immediately change it overnight, but I think it makes it possible.
That I have a
Yeah, and that's exactly what I just wanted to echo, Kelly. That is such a good question, because not only does it put it, thank you, Connor, in the front of the minds of these committees, but just as Connor says, this has to go to town meeting. And so many times voters think that they have no say in this, and of course we do. As a resident of Easton for 30 years, going to town meeting is the way to have a say in these things. And at our very first open house in January at Queeset House, we asked folks, what is something that you celebrate about Easton, and what do you think are some challenges we have? And that's where this whole tension, the tension between two competing values, neither being right or wrong, really came out. That residents said, oh, I love the open space, I love the conservation commitments, and someone said, you can't build here, I can't get a permit. And it's just like neither one of those are right or wrong. But looking at the tension of those two, I think really lets voters know, as Connor's saying, when these project opportunities come in front of town meeting, hopefully folks will be more knowledgeable about the trade-offs, the options that happen if you vote yes or no for these things.
Before I go, Kelly, did you want to?
Yeah.
I was just going to ask about accountability to these things.
So if I could I think I can answer a little bit of your accountability question. And I'm going to just give Brian credit, because I think what he said might have been one of the most impactful things that I heard tonight, which is he literally took responsibility for the fact that he hadn't been as involved in something, and he was going to make it a point to go and be involved. I can tell you, for me, I've never been to an Economic Development Council meeting. I have never shared my view that I believe there should or shouldn't be more planning, more zoning, more building, and I need to do that. I will also say, and invite you all to give you another example. People don't show up at the CPA meeting and say, I really want to make sure that you don't prioritize purchasing all of land that could be developed and turned into 250 unit developments that could add fundamentally $2 to $3 million worth of new growth to our payrolls. Not one person has ever showed up to a CPA meeting to say that.
Yeah, that's a recurring problem throughout any of the boards and committees.
But I think we have to make sure we say we, because individuals can really make a huge difference in our community by going to these meetings and saying how they feel. Because I'll tell you, we do hear about the fact that we should be protecting wetlands, and I'm not judging that. I think that's important. I've learned more about spotted salamanders and gray salamanders, and I mean this. I value that. Easton loves that. But I also have heard a ton of people say we want new growth, and yet nobody ever really shows up to our meetings to say, how are you prioritizing your spend? What will happen if those parcels of land on Pequannock becomes available? It's one of your priority parcels. That could either have 150 to 200 houses on it, or it could be kept as farmland, which I live there. I would love to continue to be able to take pictures of sunset at Clover Valley Farm. However, I can tell you, I know that dollar costs 7 figures. And there's a lot of other priority parcels behind 138 at the Marshall Farm, like dozens of acres, hundreds of acres. But nobody has come and said how, and so I'm not saying that we're wrong for that. I'm just saying there's an opportunity to use the existing forums that are out there. The PACE committee could have easily been the budget subcommittee. Our charge is almost identical, just so that you know. But thankfully, we found a way to galvanize support, create awareness. That could happen with a lot of things. People can go to Concom and say, could you do me a favor? I'd really like you to understand how are your laws and rules different than what the state has, because I believe we're more strict. And I would like to understand, is there a way that we can potentially loosen the restrictions while still preserving what makes Easton very special? And I don't know if that's possible, but
that is what this is doing, right? Because
that's the goal of this,
Yes,
is to
so
tell
then-
people you need to go to these things to do that.
to tell people, but also to have goals for the committee, right?
No, we can't
So this
set,
is not
we
a
can't
goal
set
for the committee?
legislation for that committee. What I can do is to tell you that you should go. I should go. I'll speak for me. I've never gone to them and said, I really need your help. Here's our challenge. I'd be happy to sit with you and explain the economic situation Easton finds itself in so that you are more empowered and informed and you can go back. And if enough people go into the select board and say something, or go to CPA and say something, it helps us be able to represent what the resident wishes are. Where we are going to have been talking with them and meet with them, but PACE isn't empowered to legislate.
So this isn't a pledge this is a pledge that when town votes on it, the people are saying they pledge to do these things.
No, so
Pace
I
thinks we
think
should do these
I think part of the lost in translation here is there is a summary of this on screen right now. The document, your actual pledge that you are being asked to sign by PACE, is more detailed and lays out the delineation that one of the things it says is like the select board, who are a signatory of it, and they're the chief policy board of town, will support and encourage the boards that they appoint, like planning and Concom, to do this work. We're just being realistic that we don't want to mislead the public that if finance committee, select board, and school committee vote to adopt this pledge, that changes legislation. Only town meeting can do that. It does, I think, communicate an important set of values from the highest elected boards in town, reflective of this process that we heard from the public, that we'll do what we're supposed to do, which is we'll work with the planning board and the staff that support them to say, how can we find out opportunities to advance these goals within your charge? That might feel too squishy, but there's no way to kind of circumvent, and it wouldn't be frankly appropriate or fair to do so, right? I mean, the finance committee would not want another board to be able to adopt a pledge that forces you to do a certain thing, right? So I think it's like a master plan, right? Like Envision Easton, where you do a collaborative process to identify and filter what are the things we need to be prioritizing, and then that becomes a leadership. It is a we, because a major change has to go through town meeting. But it matters to people in positions like mine, or directors of planning, or people in planning boards, to know, because Tom is correct. You don't get just the way that the structure works with how planning works, right? You have to notify like immediate abutters. That's not going to necessarily give a representative sample of how everyone in a community may feel about growth, right? And so it's important, and I think constructive and helpful for these boards. So the pledge is by you all in your role as elected officials who have a significant impact on the budget. On that, this is what PACE heard. This is what PACE thinks makes sense if we are going to stretch and override as far as we can. That we do need to lean into growth where it makes sense. And if we're going to do that, we need to support and have the backs of these policy committees. That doesn't circumvent the vote of people. Citizens get to vote on zoning. That doesn't mean the planning board has to abolish single acre zoning in Easton overnight, right? Which I probably shouldn't even joke about. But it sets out, I think, a really important framework for those groups to work with and to point back to, like we do with the master plan, or frankly, like we've done with the comprehensive facilities replacement plan, right? That informed fixing Parkview and Murrow Hall, or replacing them and then doing those things. So it can't force those things. A lot of it has to come back through town meeting, but town meeting created PACE. So I think that's really important.
Anything else on this slide? Okay. And
No,
please,
I think the email is very that you sent us is very expansive, and it's definitely worth us. And there's hard copies, yeah, and it's definitely worth us taking the time to probably reread and come up with questions maybe we can ask the committee via email. But it's pretty well laid out.
okay, there's a little more detail, and that
Yes.
was a huge effort by not only 19 people. I can't tell you the hours to sort of get every word and comment, as tight as could be under what's appropriate. And please don't be nervous if you see 70 slides here. What's attached to this is the entire Blanche Ames we'll just be here till tomorrow. The entire Blanche Ames presentation and the entire Queeset House presentation. I'm just going to go through a couple more slides, but they're just available there as support slides and resources. Numbers 3 and 4 are characterized here, and number 3 relates to this impact on seniors, veterans, individuals with disabilities, basically any of the categories of folks who are income challenged. And as Tom said, we recognize that for some folks, this is really hard. They may very well want the kind of stabilization and services and things that we have or sustaining our services, but simply cannot afford it. So we had a whole slide at our Blanche Ames presentation of programs that currently exist for folks in these categories. And again, you'll see some more detail on that, but basically PACE is putting forward a compact that offers 2 things. One, more educational efforts on these things. We found some residents are not even aware of some of these opportunities, and that finally there would be an effort to expand these programs where possible, the relief programs that would give some tax relief to these vulnerable populations.
Are there any plans to streamline it? Because I know some of these programs are kind of all over the place and it can be hard to navigate. Are there any plans to create a website or anything like that that streamlines all the programs?
Do you want to talk about that? I was just going to mention, there are Health and Human Services has some of the information now, Council on Aging. We have some actual PACE members talking to the Council on Aging about these, but.
Sure, thank you. So yes, that's one of the things we struggle with a lot here. We don't have any staff devoted to content management, so everyone just kind of does what they can. And so that leads to all the information's out there, but it's not always accessible. So we are working in my office with the departments, primarily the assessors and then Health and Community Services, who administer a variety of programs, to start consolidating those at a dedicated assistance page. So we've started it. It's easton.ma.us/assistance. And there are bits and pieces kind of all over, because there's so many. Some of them are statutory programs we have to offer from the state. Some are based on your veteran status. But we know we want to start pulling that together and having that be in a more concise place. I think it's really important for anyone listening to know that even if you're having a hard time finding what you think you may or may not qualify for on our website, you can walk into Frothingham Hall and schedule an appointment to meet with our financial and veteran services team so that they can do an intake and learn about where you're at and see what programs, whether they're Easton-specific programs like our tax aid committee or our SERVS program, that we've put hundreds of thousands of dollars in financial assistance to veterans and seniors, or it's state programs that you may qualify for, but you might not know about. So that is available to people. We do not have a lot of staff, which I hope is not surprising. So it may not be available like the instant you walk in, but you can definitely set up time at Frothingham and meet with folks to make sure that if there are programs that you are entitled to or eligible for, that we try to find ways to connect you with those.
And looking at some of the programs that were easier to find, it does seem like some of them offer a significant amount of money, not just small dollars.
Yes, depending on the program. And he would probably be here tonight with us if he wasn't doing it elsewhere, but this is obviously top of mind for a lot of us right now. So the chief assessor and the director of HCS are at the Lions Club right now having that conversation and going through, here's everything we're offering. And so we know we need to do more to streamline that and make it more accessible. So it's good feedback. We've started with that webpage. You can do it in person at Frothingham, but that's something we will need to have buttoned up ahead of town meeting.
Excellent. And then the budget efficiencies and annual caps that are noted in this section. Beginning in 2027, the general fund operating budget requests for town and school will be capped at a rolling 2-year average, not to exceed 4% growth. And I think after everything you've heard tonight, this is incredibly challenging. This 4% came after long periods of study and using this dynamic worksheet that was built for us that you could look to see what happens at different caps through a period of a few years going forward. And then all 19 PACE members weighing in on this, just as they did for the values for the override amount and the total total size of the problem. Again, a very narrow range of values set for this, and something that will be a very rigorous continued financial management for the town and the school sides, particularly if we have continued inflation that we've been talking about. Yes, thank you.
Because it's interesting you put a cap at it at 4%. The school committee, did they agree with this?
I was going to say, number one, we had many people sitting at the table who represented the school side, but we will be presenting this to the school committee tomorrow evening.
Okay. The chair of the school committee and superintendent and teachers union reps are on pace.
4.
Yeah.
4. Sorry,
Yes.
this was unanimously adopted.
Yeah, we have they were part of the conversation, they were part of the discussion, and they were part of this vote offering this percentage. A great question, yes.
But I think to be clear, we were all doing it eyes open, and you should as well, if I can advise you, that this is a hard commitment. But this, much like leading into growth, was probably one of the most common pieces of feedback from the public. This was right up there, which is what's the multi-year plan to stretch this, right? And one of the only ways you could do that is with a commitment like this. And what that means is that, one person that we spoke with, and it was a really good conversation, but it was very, very frank, and they said, why isn't the number bigger? I don't want to have to worry about this every 10 years. I was like, you're going to have to worry about it a lot sooner than 10, right? And because this is just a system of laws and finance we need to work with. And if there's not some kind of regularity there, it'll be hard for my position and for the departments here. But I don't know, and I'm open to finance committee's feedback, but I don't think anyone on PACE felt you could really go to people and ask for a tax increase and not have a conversation about this part.
Again, keeping in mind, this compact is a tool that helps us show the community that there will be continued financial rigor of our policies and procedures. That's what, this is doing, and this is not going to be easy. And of course, the second bullet talks about exceptions from mandated services. We've just talked about special education costs and things like that that are beyond our control and just have an extraordinary inflationary impact. So should a department need to budget in excess of this cap to meet a mandatory requirement, they'll also be required to have a mitigation plan by the third quarter of the fiscal year that outlines how they will offset these costs. So read more cuts in programs and services and things should one of these mandates come down that's beyond their control, including potential reductions in other non-mandated services. So, this is not over with this override or with this compact, as we've said a number of times this evening. Are there any other questions or comments on this?
So that's a tricky one when you get into the special education realm, just have kiddos going through the system and needing services. If they need the therapeutic services and the district isn't able to provide it, it's a pretty hefty cost to educate them outside of the district.
That's right.
That said, asking the school to then find other areas to cut is just going to be impossible.
It's terrible. It's a very, very difficult situation.
Because there's a double whammy there for the schools, right? It's the 4%, and then I think it used to be 200,000. I just happen to know that number for an outplacement of a student.
It can vary, but yes,
Right?
that's not a ridiculous number. Anywhere between 100,000 and 300,000 we've even heard.
Okay, so just to find 200,000, let's just use that number. It's going to be a double hit on the schools.
I'm not sure I understand the double hit part.
So there's the 4% cap
Yeah.
for their budget each year.
Yeah.
And let's just say the budget is done and it's 5% growth or 6%. They already have to reduce it to 4. Then if it's during the school year, right, you find out that the child needs to be outplaced, right? That starts just as soon as you find that placement. And so that payment then follows the child plus additional resources.
Yeah.
So within the budget year, you're already, let's just say you're at 6, so you brought it down to 4, right? So you had cuts there, and then it's January of the school year, and then the child is being outplaced, and so you have to find that funding.
I might just broaden it because I think what you're really saying is that any unfunded mandate that comes, whether it's the school or the town, is an undue burden that means they have to find it someplace else under this, which candidly, it happens now. Like, while we haven't put caps on, we have a defined revenue cap each year that is already restricting people every year on what they can or can't do. And you're spot on. Special education is a challenging one because it's state mandated. It can be $300,000 for a full residential outplaced
Yes, full year.
therapeutic environment. Thankfully, that is not the norm.
Right.
It is the rare, but they are massively expensive. So I'm not disagreeing with you, but what I just want to make sure people understand is that if the state passes the fact that we have to make sure that we paint our roads with reflective pigmented paint so that cars that are electric and can self-drive can see that and reflect back, that is also something that has to come out of your budget. So anything that happens outside of the norm, to your point, has an outsized impact because there's already fixed. Now, that said, thankfully, at least they'll have some more revenues to work with, right? Hopefully, they can do more by utilizing the free cash for capital projects. Capital projects play a very material role in your operating budgets. There's a relationship there because if you can't maintain your capital assets to the right degree, then you have to spend more on R&M to fix them. So I'm not saying you were wrong. I just wanted to broaden it that those unfunded mandates could come on the
town side. Yeah.
the school side.
Right.
And to be clear, that's actually why we did a 2-year rolling, 4% per year, so that it doesn't create a situation where maybe you can sustain service at 3.5 in this year, but you'll be penalized and couldn't do 4.5 next year or something like that happening. So it provides a small amount of that flexibility. But your comment is accurate. I mean, I think we tried as a committee to find some balance there, to have some flex.
There's a mechanism to create engagement for challenges that are unforeseen. Look, if the federal government executes what they've been saying, and I'm not bringing this up to bring a national issue, except that it has a local impact. The city of Boston is concerned about $100 million of funding. That's real. People have said, well, how do you know that this will get you 5 years? We'll be very honest. We don't. We're not here to ever give you any guarantees. But this is a very fair representation based upon what we know, what we see in the short term, and what we have experienced historically, that we believe you're giving some really talented people in the town administrator and the school superintendent the ability to solve for some of the challenges that will absolutely arise. The schools, I think we've heard this, but they work real hard to make sure that they have special education classes and curriculum that keeps as many kids as possible within our school and not have to be outplaced because they know the financial burden that they bring.
And that's better for the students as well. They stay in the community, with their peers. And I think you alluded to that, Train. It's the ideal, but there are times that either we don't have the programs for these students, and of course we're mandated to provide this. So, I think the other point is that's a reality today. This is not something that hasn't happened before.
And if we don't have the override, I think the risk goes up higher of having kids be outplaced if we're cutting staff. Mm-hmm.
Well, yes, because we can talk about the fact that the COVID emergency funds that were used to help as a stopgap for, teachers and therapists and psychologists to work with these students, thinking the federal government, that this would be an 18-month need. The need is absolutely not over. And so we still have to figure out a way to provide services for those students now with the money gone. So it's a continued issue.
Give you another capital analogy. It is a proven fact that if you can intercede in a child's development younger when they are having challenges, that it will fundamentally cost you less as they age and are older with services that are much more complex and complicated to service them with. Proven fact.
Proven fact.
So if you want to invest quote unquote money in a capital way to get a better outcome years down the road, I would recommend you do that. Proven fact. The more kids that you expose to a foreign language earlier in their career and multiple languages therein, the more improved their outcomes and educational process are going forward. We do not do that. Just so that you know. We're not at proactive, aggressive, gold standard. We're not. We don't have 5, 6 languages that Sharon is.
Yeah, right. Or starting languages in elementary school for
Right.
students. There's.
So But again, if you did that and you spent that money there, you'd get a better product and outcome at the end. So to me, that is capital programming is just as important from a human asset standpoint as it is a physical building standpoint. So those are things we're not doing that as a community, I would hope someday we'd get closer to doing that rather than what we're talking about, which is cutting dozens of teachers, increasing class size, and removing the critical support structures that support the mental outcomes we're trying to get and keeping kids engaged. That this budget that you'll hear on April 3rd, please go, we'll put forth.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else on these 2 points?
No.
Okay. Slide 5 talks about some of the things that Wendy and Connor already introduced, the idea of protecting our financial reserves and shielding our bond rating. So the idea, if this override passes, is that no free cash would be used in the 2026 operating budget. 2027 would limit the use of free cash to 15%, and subsequent years would comply with the existing financial policies that already mandate that in order to protect that bond rating. Health insurance and the OPEB liabilities, Connor addressed some of these as well, that the town would look to try to address this unprecedented inflationary growth by looking at a whole host of things, such as annual required contributions to the trust fund, and where possible, reducing this long-term liability. Capital asset funding, the town will prioritize the use of free cash, as we said, to support capital needs rather than operating needs, rather than putting that in the operating budget. Things like police vehicles, school technology, and road repairs, and build the stabilization fund rather than using these things for operating expenses. So if necessary, the town may discontinue using free cash for capital purposes if that allows us to maintain fiscal stability. Anything on that point? The last one's very straightforward and easy, and here's, I love, Kelly, your questions about measurement and accountability. The PACE committee also agreed that we need to have some measurement and accountability on this, and that could happen on an annual basis when the town and school departments put forward their budget proposal, that they would have a narrative as part of that budget proposal or message outlining and explaining how their budget has either advanced, we hope, met, or if not possible, falls short of the goals of this compact. So we're asking for that narrative on an annual basis. And then you'll just see the link there for the full compact that you have in front of you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for listening to all of that. So we really feel like that was a little bit extra from our charge, but really important. And I hope that you agree that some of these things we've outlined, I think, give the public just additional comfort in regard to the structure and the rigor. And we hope that you feel the same way.
No,
Any
we
other questions?
certainly appreciate the transparency, and as I've been thinking about this problem, it is a negotiation between the town and the town, basically. So you give us more money today, here's what we're going to do in the future to make sure that we're mitigating this. So I thank you for the extended thoughts you put into the compact here. It's going to be very useful for the our other town colleagues here to read and know that there's two sides to this coin.
Appreciate that.
And that there's a plan for the accountability, because I think that's key.
Yes,
to
absolutely.
hold people accountable every year. How are you progressing towards these goals is important.
It's definitely one thing to put it down on paper, and it's one thing to actually have it accountable, be accountable.
Robert, you
Well,
want to say?
it always, I think it does keep us, we accountable. Who's our audience though? I'm thinking more of the voters who go out that day. How are we getting this message out to them that we are being accountable? And that we are setting ourselves up for growth for the future and how we spend our money? I mean, how are we doing that? How are we getting this message out?
Well, I assume we'll present this at town meeting. Is that correct, Connor, as part of the?
Yeah, so we can't do this length at town meeting, right? And I say that as half of the problem. Minimum half.
Sure, Mike's the other half.
So we're at the stage of trying to gather your support this week, hopefully. And we will share this online, and we share the cases materials. This will be part of a discussion at the budget hearing. we're talking about maybe trying to do a third open house for PACE at some point between that hearing and town meeting. It's a little tight, but we might try and pull it off. And then at town meeting, PACE will give a shorter presentation to folks as the introduction to myself, the superintendent, presenting here's budget option 1 and option 2. But it's really this, people have asked about accountability and like our role. You are one of the signatories on this, so part of this is on you. As you're having conversations with folks in your lives who are saying, what is going on here? Like, where's the money? Why are we in this position? What will they do if we do to say, hey, those are really important questions. We hear that a lot, and that's why we're holding ourselves accountable with this.
I think that's a key point. I mean, I mentioned town meeting, but hopefully that's not the first time that most people are hearing this. We know that there'll be a few folks for whom that is true, so it's important to have it there for those folks. But this is a huge tool, I think, that you can speak to, as Connor's saying, when you're speaking to the public. I mean, I certainly talk about it with folks, and how do we know this is not going to happen again next year? Well, first of all, we got to get back to the inflation and what caused it, but I think this is a huge measure of accountability to give some folks who are a little bit unsure on the issue a little bit more assurance, but they need to start hearing about this now.
Right. And you all have 2 months, which is, there's time, but
Not a lot.
no, but it's also,
It's the right time.
It's the right time.
Yeah,
So I guess I would say it's not often that you have an event for community at a school auditorium like Blanche Ames and you hit capacity. We had more people at Blanche Ames, over 200 people, not including the presenters, I think, that showed up that almost maxed out the capacity. And that's more than show up at town meeting.
I know.
Right? So I just want you guys to know we are at a good place. Like, you're going to feel like it's late, and that's okay. But our engagement crescendo is increasing. I do want to share some things with you because there's an ask that we have. So I just want you all to know just a timeline of events so you can appreciate how much effort I know you see Nancy and I a lot, but this is a PACE committee thing. There's no way we could do this without 17 other people that are amazing, candidly. On January 8th, we had an open house at Queesit House. 226, we had Blanche Ames. We sold that one out. March 3rd, we had an open Q&A at Town Hall where we came here and set up a mini Q&A. 3-4, we had the FinCom meeting with you folks that people could have attended. 3-5, we had an Ames Free Library session. I think Patrick
And I engaged.
3-6, we had an open Q&A via Zoom so that somebody said I couldn't get there or somebody said I couldn't do technology. They had 2 ways. March 7th, 14th, and the 21st, we staffed from 7 to 8 at Dunkin' Donuts every morning. Some people stopped by, which was great. We had another library session on March 8th. We had 2 meetings at the Frothingham Hall for seniors. So credit to Chris Cohn and I think some
Another
other folks
one's
that went
coming
there.
for that too.
And we were at least 3 school events as well, whether it was teachers' conferences. And I bring this up for 2 reasons. 1, huge credit to that team. 2, as much as it doesn't sound like 2 months is a lot, we're tired. We as a committee are tired. Like we've been going for a long time. We're happy that we were able to finish our charge. We are signing up to do another open house, which is a ton of effort. And thank you to the schools in the town. Like they set up chairs, make sure they print things, like just so much goes on. Here's my ask. I would ask you guys to have a table at that open house. Like if you believe in this, right? Like you're gonna have to raise your hand. You have to raise an orange ticket. You're gonna have to support this or not. So like you folks are here for a reason, but please come down and have a table. Like you don't know how much wind it gives to us to have other people who are financially literate having and saying things to residents and friends that you know. Like it just means the world to us, but I think more importantly, it means the world to the residents that they see unification. They see that a lot of intelligent people saw this, people who live in this town who are signing up potentially for whatever we get are there. So I would ask the chair of the finance committee and all of you, like staff 1 table, staff 2 tables. There's a lot of you. And that way there's just more communication to people about the root of what's going on. That like, God, this Broussard guy, he talks a lot, and I don't really know him, but I know Kelly. Let me ask her. Like, like that happens. Like, a lot of people might not be able to. They like Nancy taught for 25 years. I'll listen to her. I mean that sincerely. Like, there's that cross section of people on our committee is so impactful. You guys could add a tremendous amount of value.
We each have our own constituency, so to speak, right, of friends and people who we work with and things, and it's really important that those folks hear it from us. They trust you. You know, they know you and they trust you, and it makes a difference when they hear it from someone who they know. So,
If you have
let's not disappoint the two PACE chair and vice chair. Who wants to already volunteer? All the pressure's on you.
I nominate Patrick Helen.
I'm going to be at the PACE table. I can't.
he's already on the committee.
I can't do double tables. I'll be there.
Put the tables next to each other.
We
Sit
could.
right in the middle.
We
because
could.
it's public and people might latch onto it.
Okay. Well,
Yeah, but
shoot
just
me
figure
a
it out.
note if not.
Sure.
You volunteering, Shireen? You have a oh, nice.
There we-
Thank
I thought you had a
thank
question. I was like, no, we're not taking any more questions. We're going
Thank
straight to
you.
volunteering.
We would ask you
Thank
something
you.
else. I appreciate if the answer is no, that's okay, but you don't get what you don't ask for. We would really appreciate if you would entertain voting in support of this compact tonight. It would be powerful to go and stand in front of what I believe will be a very busy school committee meeting tomorrow night, already saying that the PACE committee, the select board, and the finance committee have voted to support and make that commitment to the residents of our community. If you can't, I appreciate that too. I respect that, but just know it would mean, again, the world to us to be able to go into that forum tomorrow night with that support.
I have a question before we do the vote.
Sure.
You did just go over your plan, not your plan, your calendar. I just got this in my email probably this week, and I did go through it. So my question is, how well have you shopped this community compact? I know the select board voted on it by way of presentation, and probably similarly the school committee, but and now us. But outside of these three intimate presentations, how well have you shopped this in the community?
Yeah, I think it truly reflects what we heard from the community.
It does.
Candidly.
Okay.
We didn't go to the community to take a vote as to what they may or may not want, just full candor. That's we were proactive in assembling this. However, I think it was great that the PACE committee developed it collaboratively, voted unanimously for it, and the same thing on the select board after debate and questions.
And one thing I didn't say, actually, it's a very good question, Shana, about how it was developed. We looked at a number of other compacts, a number of other ones that other communities have done, pages and pages we read. Some of the things were maybe not relevant to Easton or not as important to Easton. And then again, tons of opportunities. There must have been maybe 15 different kind of things that could have been on there, and we decided that, 5 and an accountability measure, so it was plenty.
Okay.
And so everybody came together and said, what are the 5 that would be most relevant to Easton and probably give the strongest message to the residents voting on this. So
So
thank you,
is-
I should have outlined that in the beginning.
Is this then your supporting document to your letter asking for the override?
Yes, this would go with that. This compact
This is
goes,
the other side of it. Essentially.
Yes.
This is potentially reductionary, but this is the skin in the game, right?
Okay.
Like that's the. I think Brian said it well. Like this is the town negotiating with the town. In that, we didn't come up with this whole cloth, right? I certainly didn't. But when you sent out we sent out to all the members of PACE. Here is several other community compacts that were in similar situations. This is what we're asking for from an override standpoint because of the economic uncertainties that we're facing. Here are the considerations we are going to give back to the town to show that we're going to be good stewards of that money if you so choose to provide us with.
So future considerations.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Okay.
I think
Here's-
it's
here it
important
goes
to note, we glossed over it, is that we talked about this in public meetings. I did actually have a decent amount of people joining us hybrid over the course of,
Good call.
I think,
yes.
2 or 3 meetings over 6 weeks. So,
That's
this
like
was-
40 hours. Just to
This,
be
there
clear.
was a lot of public kind of debate and deliberation on this, and kind of gathering feedback directly from folks at those open houses as well.
Good point.
It was
Great
only
question.
just finalized though and voted last week.
Right.
Okay.
So I would say, Monday night, presenting it to select board in that public forum, to you this evening. I don't know how many people are online, but I hope that there are a number of people who are watching it. And again, to school committee tomorrow night as sort of our first formal public.
Sure. So I make a
Presentation.
motion to,
Let's go.
huh? I'm asking for and also making the motion to accept the community compact, or no?
Yeah, that's fine. You can sit.
Second.
To affirm or vote for the community compact. Yeah.
To affirm the community.
Look, I'm doing the meeting minutes. This is going to be relatively straightforward. We've got our vote. Did you second? Of course you did.
I did.
All right, let's go. All those in favor?
A little discussion?
Well, if we have a motion on the table, we're posted. We can hold on the finalization of said second if there is any other discussion.
Is there?
Pretty much once the motion's out there, we're there. So
Would you like to discuss it?
No.
Would you like?
If you have questions, we're happy to.
no.
I'll say I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Because none of us
I want people to feel like your arms.
It's 9 o'clock. Like, let's be fair. So all those in favor, show of hands. Any opposed? It is unanimous.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank
Did
you.
I write it?
Amazing.
A lot of work. I participated.
Guys, just make sure that you're including me in this discussion. Like, they get a lot of attention, let's be fair, but I'm much needier. So,
Kind of like
All
the
the attention every time we
kind of like the host of a game
guys,
show.
welcome to the
That's
5-hour
huge.
FinCom meeting where I
Yeah.
have a stand-up set at the beginning.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you all
for your
very
support.
much.
Thank you,
Thank
Pace.
you.
Please, if you need us, call us.
Yes.
Have meetings, talk to people. We really need you these next 2 months. I am not joking. Like, we are tired. I think I saw
don't look tired,
Nancy
though. We look
7
great.
nights in a row 2 weeks ago, 6 nights in a row this
We
week.
see each other more than our families.
We do,
You know,
we do.
The phone rings and I, you
Yep.
know, is it that Tom?
And we love it. We
No.
love it. But where I'm going with it is, look, if you want to have a breakfast or something
Yes.
at Dunkin' Donuts or the Beanery and you want to post that you'll be there with somebody from Pace, we'll meet you for coffee. Like, and if nobody shows, that's okay.
We
Like,
actually had
it's-
we had a
we had some
We've had some
people
very nice
show.
coffee mornings,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
yes.
did at the library,
But
we had some decent
we just
questions.
want to make sure
Right.
you feel empowered to say, when somebody says, I didn't know, or why would they always keep it secret, that you're like, hey, you might not have heard, and I get that, that's okay, but please appreciate that people spend amazing amounts of time in outreach.
Actually,
And we'll keep doing it.
selfishly, for those of you that may or may not be running for office in the current season, this might be another option for you to have a little bit more mix and mingle with your town constituents, right? Yeah.
I mean, studies have proven that every time we hold a meeting, we get more and more people to fill out the rooms. We might be at Gillette by the time
That's
Tom
what
comes.
With Taylor
So,
Swift to open. we're
just
thinking,
saying.
You know.
Popular people. But thank you guys so much. Appreciate
Thank you.
it.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your questions and your engagement too.
Thank you, you two. I appreciate it.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
what do we have left on our agenda?
Minutes.
Only items left are 1 meeting minute, and then, as I said, there's 6 articles. Those 6 articles, I will say, my goal for tonight was that the majority of the ones we have ready to vote are effectively the same ones we have at this meeting time every time. Like, hey, accept annual reports, set some revolving funds. You guys have had these for a while, so there's nothing surprising in these. My goal was to read the summary and hold a vote on these because they are not the most materially difficult ones to go through.
And am I correct? There's another meeting coming up shortly.
That would be the intent to go through 1, 2, 3, 4, and I think 12.
We've been here for 3 hours. This is for my other colleagues as well. Do we want to go through these, or do we want to postpone these to the next meeting and just handle the minutes?
I would like to postpone. You want to bang them out too?
I think the majority. So I think we can get through the majority of these. Why don't we say this? It's 10 of 9. My babysitter's going to cost me like $400 at this point. But it's 10 of 9. 6, 7, 8, and 9, relatively straightforward. 10, 11, and 13, relatively straightforward. Let's do the first, or no, 6, 7, 8, and 10, straightforward. Let's do a couple, do a time check, and see where we're going.
I think that's fair.
Let's do this one first. We have meeting minutes. I've sent them around. Does anyone have any, before you say motion to give me a hot second to finish the sentence. Does anyone have any changes or material updates for the meeting minutes that have been sent around? Seeing none.
Motion to accept meeting.
Second.
There we go. All those in favor?
Yes.
Opposed? Opposed? No. Unanimous. Thank you. All right, so
Are there items on here that don't require Wendy?
there are, but
I think we can get through these in like literally 5
Okay,
minutes.
perfect.
too.
That's
Like
fine.
Wendy
Yeah,
effectively.
we're already here. The cost is sunk.
I know the cost is sunk, but you also have families.
I know. I appreciate
If
you
you
being
take the
thoughtful.
hint.
Connery could have left an hour ago. It's not going to end well for any of us.
All right, so let's do this. So we're going to shift into warrant article. We're starting with article. Let me double check. I'm not screwing this up. We're starting with Article 6, which is the acceptance of annual reports. This is an annual vote to accept the town report. Hard copies of the town report will be available at voter check-in. Any discussion on this one?
No.
Seeing none.
Motion to recommend
Second.
Article 6.
All those in favor? Guys, we're cruising. There's 6. 7, this one takes a hot second. To see if the town will vote to authorize the total expenditures of the following revolving funds pursuant to, et cetera, for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2025, to be expended in accordance with said bylaws. These are all the expenditure pieces. There's nothing drastic in here. Wait a minute, let me just double check. Is ours on here?
Is there any change? No, yours is a operating budget.
Ours is
Wendy, is there
operating,
any
you're right.
changes to these balance limits over a prior year? There's typically only a little fluctuation. These are spending limits regardless of how much we collect. Is that right?
Now, I think one of them may have changed.
Like drastically, like people in town would be blown away by how much it changed?
No,
Yeah.
and it's really just to keep up with like whatever is in that account. I mean, you can only spend what's in the account.
Right.
So these are opening balances for FY26?
Correct.
Well, those are just spending limits.
These are
Like,
the limits.
like for example, like one.
Why don't you come on up, Wendy?
Come on up.
So these are fee-based revolving accounts. These are not traditional income and expense out of an operating budget. It is for like permit fees and things like that annually, regardless of how much we collect through that. Town meeting has to set the spending limit.
Right. So for example, like the recreation one, $300,000. That was just put there in case revenues, or they needed to spend that kind of. We've never come close
What
to
a
hitting
great
that
problem
amount.
to have. Right.
But to be clear, if we don't bring in revenue to meet that, we can't spend 300.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So this
not like
is
you
a
have to
spending
spend
cap
it.
agnostic of how much you bring in, but you also can't spend more than you bring in. I don't know
Right.
if that's helpful.
Got it.
Any other questions, discussions, thoughts?
So these are just,
There is one.
I hate to call these placeholders, but that's pretty much what they are? Are these placeholders? Since you're not?
It's just a limit on how much can be spent.
Okay.
If you had a gangbuster year and you wanted to spend $100,000 on town clerk records, sorry, you can't. If you had a
Right.
low year and you only had enough to do
Can I make
it,
a motion?
please do.
Make a motion to accept.
Second.
All those in favor? Any opposed?
You might have offended Mr.
Unanimous.
Tito.
Thank you.
7. This one's easy. Article 8, elected officials' compensation. I can say confidently that this year, I'm glad the Finance Committee isn't on here because we are not part of the downdraw of funds in town. But these are the same effectively for
These have not
Like
changed
20
in
something
years? Yeah.
Is this annually or monthly?
these are annually.
Annually.
Annually, yeah. To be clear, yeah. And I think that's important. I mean, that anyone's hanging on, watching online. Like, I mean, you're talking $150 a
Those
month.
paid
for the select
monthly,
board.
bi-monthly, weekly
Yeah, this
Can
is
I make a
daily.
motion?
motion.
We have a motion on the table. Do we have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Unanimous for 8. Number 9, we talked about we don't have anything yet. Wendy, you'll obviously keep us updated on that. This is usually
Will
the
do.
one we come back the day of town meeting if we have to vote on, so we'll skip that.
Correct.
Article 10, this housekeeping article will remove the remaining balance of $344,000 left over from the original $950,000 authorization for water main replacement repair on Pond Street, Queeset Brook, and Black Brook Road, which was not fully borrowed due to the receipt of supplemental state funding for Black Brook Road and would otherwise remain in the books indefinitely. Questions, thoughts, discussion?
This is auditing cleanup, this is accounting cleanup?
Yes,
It's
it's
the
getting
housekeeping.
a debt authorization off the books, so we have no intent of issuing
Right.
because we received state funding and covered the cost. So we don't want to
Yeah,
have
we
that.
got
Make a motion to
350,000.
accept.
Great.
Second.
I got one. We have a second. All those in favor? All those opposed? This is how municipal government goes, people.
Thank you.
Article 11, Fire Department Safety Training. This article will fund one-time safety training costs, which are no longer able to be absorbed by the fire budget due to the budget cuts we've been talking about all night. Easton Fire and Rescue Department is a participant in a regional federal grant with 20 communities to obtain quote-unquote blue card certification, our nationally renowned program defining best standard command practices, preparing incident commanders to make better fireground decisions, potentially limiting dangerous mistakes that cause injury, death, and unnecessary fire losses. Each participant must complete 3 8-hour days of simulation training and evaluation at an estimated cost of $50,000. The fire department will also require $10,000 in training costs related to operating the new ladder truck arriving in July.
So I do have a question.
Hit it.
Is this stating that this request is not coming out of their budget, but out of your budget?
It's coming out of neither. So what if things weren't so dire, we would fund training appropriately and recurring.
Meaning that your budget, not theirs.
No, it's not in any operating budget anymore. So we're proposing it as a special article because we can't afford to maintain the appropriate amount of training in the fire department, recurring spend. So we're treating this as a one-off authorization for this one purpose because they're already in process for this training.
Okay.
This is not how we should be doing things, to be clear. I think
the federal grant language in there.
The training is part of a regional federal, I would imagine, FEMA grant with multiple communities to
The grant doesn't.
well, no, I think the federal money is helping pay for some of the training and the instructors. We have our cost of training is paying for our staff to be there.
Right, this is for the testing so that they can get the certification.
Okay.
Is that 50,000 per person participating, or is it 50,000 total?
No,
Total.
Okay.
total.
And is there any? Well, I assume that they're going to go through the training and they're not going to drop out of the training, right? It's not going to be money that's not that's spent, and then they get through 2 of the 3 8-hour classes and like, I'm not doing this.
I can't speak for a fire chief
Right.
because he's not here, but I don't think the fire chief would be
Excited about
happy
that.
with that.
I appreciate that as well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I wouldn't expect that to be a risk. But again, this is normally something under normal course we wouldn't be voting. It's a $110 million organization. We
Right.
ought to be funding our training, but we just
Yes.
So
Okay.
can't.
in the course of normal business, they would have this in their budget.
That's right.
That's
We've
correct.
cut it.
Right.
And it's not just the first year. We cut fire training in fiscal 25. It's been cut more. So this is already midstream. They're already working on this. And so we want to at least wrap this up and not literally waste the money that's been committed.
Motion.
Second.
All those in favor? I love that it was like mid-sentence. Any opposed?
Worse than you.
Okay, nothing, unanimous. 12 we don't have to do. I lost my page because I was writing down minutes. 12 we don't have to do because it's a placeholder for now. 13 is, where's the summary? This article proposes the fiscal year 2026 budget for the Community Preservation Committee. Amounts to be funded shall be considered separate appropriations. Questions, thoughts?
English, Wendy.
This is a much, very scaled back budget for the Community Preservation Committee. They're not doing any other projects. This is really the bare minimum. If you look at the total of these appropriations, it's significantly less than what we estimate the annual revenues to be. We estimate the annual revenues are gonna be like 2.46 million
Okay.
in total, but they're not looking to spend any of that at this point.
There's a caveat there. They're looking carefully at grants that are in consideration now that may lose matching state or other funds. If it's not funded in May, they may put that forward, but to date, this has been it because they are, like the planning board, kind of recognizing how much everything is in flux. A great example is one of the CPA grants is funding to advance design for a splash pad at the town pool. We can't afford to run the town pool this year. That doesn't make a lot of sense to advance. So I just want to protect the CPA's right that if they have a 1 or 2 that it's timely and isn't here in May and would lose other funds, they could put it forward. But for now, there is none.
And the 130,000 is their reserve.
As a reserve account, so as part of the spending requirements of the Community Preservation Act, you have to spend or reserve a minimum of 10% in the 3 categories. And a lot of the debt service that we have already covers a lot of that. The affordable housing transfer will cover the community housing portion.
Okay.
And there is some historic debt service online. So basically, the difference between that 246,000 and what the debt is already is this 130,900 for
Okay.
historic reserves.
Thank you.
Do you think, though, if we did invest in a splash pad, that we could get enough revenue from the town pool that it could pay for itself?
That was the thinking, and under the deputy director Pitty, we have been working for years to try to drive membership up at the pool. A lot of club and fee-based things took a real hit during COVID, and the pool's one of them, and it just never recovered.
Yeah.
The pool's always been a financial challenge.
Yes.
And we love the pool, but it's yes, that would be the goal, is to continue to make it. And we started shifting programming and changing hours and adding some amenities, and we would like to add some more, but it doesn't, in my opinion, make sense to advance something like that when we can't even find a way to fund the staff there right now. Hopefully it will be in a better place in the future, but that's going to be on the shelf for now. But yes, that was the thought process. We want to continue to make it more attractive, so hopefully more people would come, and we'd have more members paying fees and could make it more sustainable.
I make a motion to accept the Article 13 CPA.
Second.
Any opposed? Yes. Before you do it, because you're waiting patiently, sort of patiently. Committee member / public comments. We don't have any public comments, obviously. Any other comments from the committee before I say one last thing, and then we can have Mike do his favorite of all time. Seeing none. The only things I will say to you is that mark your calendars today. I will be sending out another reminder for the 429 meeting. I've sent it out before. We did a doodle on it, but mark it down just to make sure that there's no issues. I put it in as 6 p.m. just to give us that extra boost of making sure everyone's there, but I believe you're right at 6:30. We'll double check. I'll get that out to you.
It is 6:30 on the website.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Maybe. So the question is, we now have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 12 still left. Chances are one of those will be the final balanced budget items that are going to be at the 29th. Cross fingers, knock wood. There very well might be a last minute bill that comes up like we typically do, or something that doesn't get covered in something else. So we could have a pre-meeting. I will typically say pre-meetings are usually literally like we do 20 minutes before, right? That will not make it as the printed article, but it's fine because you have someone that's going to say recommend, and that's literally the only thing I do at the meeting, so we'll be there for that. But those final pieces are all that's left. I do it well.
The town meeting is before or after the general election?
Before May 19th. Yeah, so you're still on the hook.
Well, actually, I'm sorry. Which election? You guys have the town election.
It's after.
Oh no, the town election
Oh, no, yeah.
is April.
Yeah, that's you're off. Yeah, you'll be fine.
Got other fish to fry.
So
We're gonna find something else for you. We're just gonna
No,
record.
I've already found my other thing.
What are you on now?
I'm cracking the economic.
Oh, you are in the
yeah.
economic, okay.
We're gonna have a
I
pick.
think
They're gonna.
that we should be meeting.
I think we should all go to that meeting and ask lots of questions of them every time.
No, but I mean, we should have joint meetings. Let's
do it.
Well, I think.
Yeah, we should have joint meetings. Lots of them.
I agree with Potter, no.
Motion to adjourn.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Any opposed?
Yeah.
Good night, you all. Thank you all so much for the attendance. Thank you, Connor. Thank you, Wendy.